Hello there, and welcome back. Whether it's your first time here or part of your nightly routine, I'm grateful to have you. This is your quiet corner of the internet where we slow down, leave the day behind, and drift into the gentle rhythm of history. So get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe brew some tea, and let's begin our story. Before we begin, one of my favorite things is reading your comments about where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Some of you are up at 3 a.m., some at dusk, others just starting the day. So, if you drop your city and your current time in the comments. Together we light up this quiet little map across the world. No pressure to like or subscribe, just close your eyes if it feels right. But if you do want more stories like this, you know where to find them. Now, let's take a slow step back in time to a world where comfort was rare, nights were cold, and surviving till morning was never guaranteed. Tonight, our journey takes us back to the close of the 18th century. To a time when the world was still being mapped, its corners still held by ancient forests and deep, quiet oceans. We are bound for the coast of Nova Scotia, in a place that would one day be called Canada. The air there is a unique mixture of pine needles and the sharp, clean scent of salt from the sea. Imagine yourself standing on the shore of Mahon Bay. It is the late summer of 1795, and the last light of the sun is painting the sky in soft shades of orange and violet. The bay is dotted with more than 300 small islands, scattered like green jewels upon deep blue velvet. Some are little more than barren rocks claimed only by seabirds, while others are covered in dense forests that have stood for centuries untouched by human hands. The air here has a texture all its own. When you breathe in deeply, you can taste the salt, the lingering signature of the high tide when the waves kiss the rocks. But as the tide recedes, exposing wide flats of mud and salt marsh, another scent rises to meet you, something older. More of the earth. It is a complex aroma of decaying seagrass, wet, dark muck, and the faintest hint of sulfur, what the locals might call the breath of the swamp. It is not an unpleasant smell, rather, it carries a primordial vitality, a testament to the ancient, fertile life of this coast. Your gaze drifts across the shimmering water to one of the islands in particular. It is unassuming, nestled close to the mainland, only about 200 meters away, like a green fingertip reaching out into the ocean. At first glance, to distinguish it from the others, its 140 acres are covered in a thick, quiet forest. It is the dominant tree, the red oak, that gives the island its name. In the summer, the leaves of these oaks are a deep, heavy green, rustling in the sea breeze with a sound like a constant, soft whisper. In the autumn, they will turn a brilliant, fiery crimson, making the entire island appear like a smoldering ember against the cool blue of the bay. It is for this signature canopy that people call it Oak Island. Among the oaks there are also pines. The wind moving through the pine forest creates a long, gentle whoosh like the sound of the sea breathing in the distance. This sound, woven with the rhythmic clapping of waves against the shore, forms a timeless, hypnotic backdrop. During the day, you can hear the calls of gulls and terns as they circle overhead or preen on the rocky shoreline. But by night, apart from the wind and the water, a profound stillness settles over the world. In 1795, Oak Island was not entirely wild. A handful of settlers, men who had remained loyal to the British Crown after the American Revolution, had been granted plots of land here and lived quiet, agrarian lives. They had cleared small patches of the forest, planted cabbage and potatoes, raising a few chickens and living their lives in rhythm with the sun. Their existence was tied to the most fundamental cycles of nature: planting in the spring, tending in the summer, harvesting in the fall, and waiting out the long, cold winters by the warmth of a fire, listening to the north wind howl outside. For these families, the island was a sanctuary, a place to make a life. It was ordinary, perhaps even a little monotonous. Life here revolved around the most basic of needs: food, warmth, and shelter. No one would have suspected that beneath this very ordinary soil lay a secret that would come to haunt and obsess the world for more than 200 years. The normalcy of this place is in itself a powerful force. The laws of nature are on full display here. The growth and decay of the forest, the ceaseless ebb and flow of the tide, the turning of the seasons year after year. Everything follows an ancient, unpredictable pattern. It is this profound, pervasive normalcy that will make the discovery of the abnormal so striking, so deeply unsettling. It will be like a single, inexplicable note played in the middle of a perfectly harmonious symphony, a note that belongs to no known instrument. Tonight, let us rest in this pristine, undisturbed quiet. Before you drift off to sleep, imagine yourself sitting on the shore of Oak Island, feeling the cool evening breeze on your skin. You can hear the sigh of the wind in the distant forest and smell the faint, earthy salt in the air. The world is peaceful and orderly. This is the story before the mystery begins, a story of pure, untouched nature. It is a reminder that all great enigmas start in a perfectly ordinary place, At a perfectly ordinary time, when a perfectly ordinary person happens to cast a glance and see the first hint of something that does not belong. That moment is coming, but not yet. For now you are safe here, in the quiet of the Isle of Red Oaks, letting the day's worries dissolve with the gentle rhythm of the waves. We last left Oak Island as it was, sleeping under a blanket of primordial quiet. Now, let us gently turn the hands of the clock to that summer of 1795. The story of what happened next begins, as so many do, with a single person's curiosity. Like many old legends, the truth of this beginning has been softened by time, blurred by countless retellings until it has become a gentle mist. There are several versions of the tale, and this uncertainty is part of the island's very fabric. One story, the one most often told, centers on a young man named Daniel McGinnis, perhaps 16 years of age. On a summer afternoon, he paddled his small boat from the mainland to the island, which some accounts say was uninhabited, perhaps to hunt or simply to explore. As he moved through the dense woods on the island's eastern end, he stumbled upon a peculiar clearing. It felt unnatural. The surrounding trees were old and moss-covered, but here, in this small space, the stumps were rotted in a way that suggested they had been felled long ago. In the center of this clearing stood a single, enormous red oak. What caught his eye was one of its thick lower limbs. About 15 feet off the ground, the branch had been sawn off several feet from the trunk. The remaining stump of the limb bore the distinct scars of rope burns, and some versions of the story say an old ship's tackle block. A simple pulley still hung from it, creaking softly in the sea breeze, and directly beneath this strange, amputated limb, the ground had settled into a shallow, circular depression about 13 feet across. The grass here was different too, stunted and sparse, as if the soil beneath had been disturbed long ago and never fully recovered. In that era, the shores of Nova Scotia were alive with tales of pirate treasure. The infamous Captain Kidd was rumored to have buried his fortune on an island somewhere east of Boston. For a young man with a spirit of adventure, this seemed the clearing. The pulley, the sunken earth, was a storybook illustration come to life. A single, powerful thought must have taken root in his mind: something is buried here. But there is another version of the story, one that feels perhaps a little closer to the quiet earth of history. According to land deeds and tax records, Daniel McGinnis was not a visiting teenager in 1795, but a man in his 30s, a farmer who already owned land on Oak Island. His two friends, John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, were not boys either, but fellow islanders, his neighbors. They were not adventurers paddling over for the day, they were men who lived and worked this very land. In this telling, the story loses some of its romantic flair and gains a texture of daily life. Perhaps it was an evening stroll across his own property that led McGinnis to notice the odd clearing. Or maybe it was the local whispers of strange, unexplained lights seen flickering on the island at night that drew the three men to investigate together. Whichever version holds the truth, the heart of the story remains the same: three ordinary people drawn to an extraordinary sight. That lone oak tree stood like a silent sentinel, guarding a secret. The sawn-off limb and its pulley told a quiet story of lifting and lowering, of heavy things being moved. And the circular depression in the earth was like a scar, healed over by time, hinting at an artificial structure, something not of nature, hidden just below the surface. This discovery was the first true disturbance in the deep, profound normalcy we spoke of last night, in a forest that followed the slow, predictable rules of nature. He was a mark left by human geometry and engineering. It was a riddle with no question, only a silent, earthen answer waiting to be unearthed. Let us imagine that moment. The air is still thick with the scent of salt and pine. The only sounds are the rustle of oak leaves and the distant murmur of the bay. The three men stand in the small clearing, gazing down at the sunken circle of earth. Their minds would have been racing with possibilities. Was it pirate gold, the forgotten cellar of some long-gone settler? Or was it something else entirely, something beyond their imagination? This unknown was both thrilling and humbling. In that instant, that the ground beneath their feet was no longer the familiar, ordinary Oak Island. Something had been buried here, long ago by unknown hands with great effort. And this depression, this simple circle in the grass, was the only door to that secret. The story begins here, not with a shovel, but with an observation, not with a shout, but with a quiet, persistent question whispered in the stillness of the woods. What is that? The next day, they would return with tools. The first cut of the spade into that soil would begin a legend that would span more than 2 centuries, consume vast fortunes and even claim human lives. But for now, on this first day of discovery, it is all just a quiet, unanswered question, a circular depression, lying peacefully in the fading light, under the watch of an old oak tree. You can rest in that quiet moment of anticipation, feeling the spark of pure curiosity that ignited this epic hunt. It is a feeling that would become a flame, passed down through generations of searchers who would come to this very island, all asking that same simple question. On that decisive summer morning, Daniel McGinn, John Smith, and Anthony Vaughan returned to the mysterious clearing, their minds still echoing with the previous day's speculation. This time they were not empty miners-handed. They carried the essential tools of their era for confronting the earth: spades and pickaxes. Let us take a quiet moment to imagine these tools. An 18th minor century spade was a different creature from the ones we know today. It often had a body of wood, but its crucial digging end was fitted with an iron shoe or nosing. This iron sheath, forged by a local blacksmith, not only provided a sharp cutting edge but also gave the tool immense strength and durability. The blade was typically flat and straight, perfect for slicing through firm soil and turf. The picasse was a sturdy wooden handle wedded to a heavy iron head, one end sharpened to a point for breaking rock and hardpan, the other flattened for prying and levering. These tools were simple, heavy, and honest. They were the primary language through which the people of that time spoke to the land. Every swing, every thrust, required a full measure of a person's strength. The three men chose to begin their work in the very center of the circular depression. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of dew and damp earth. When the first spade bit into the soft topsoil, it made a satisfying, muffled sound. They immediately found that the soil here was indeed looser than the surrounding ground, confirming their belief that it had been disturbed by human hands long ago. They worked in turns, one man digging while the other rested, their breath misting in the cool air. Sweat soon dampened their shirts as soil was lifted, spade FUL by spade FUL, and tossed aside, forming a growing mound of dark earth. The work was slow and rhythmic, the only sounds being the scrape of iron against soil and the men's occasional, low voiced conversation which seemed to be swallowed by the immense quiet of the forest. They dug down about 2 feet, a depth just past their ankles. Suddenly, one of their spades struck something hard, letting out a dull thud. The sound was different from that of hitting a random rock. It was fatter, more resonant, as if they had struck an even constructed surface. They paused, their curiosity piqued. Kneeling down, they used their hands to brush away the last layer of loose dirt. An astonishing sight was revealed. A layer of flat, heavy flagstones had been carefully laid to cover the entire area of the depression, fitted together like a mosaic to form a solid, man-made cap. They knew at once that this was no natural formation. More importantly, as would be recorded later, the stone itself was not native to Oak Island. Its type was found along the banks of Gold River some 2 miles away. This meant that someone, at some point in the distant past, had gone to the immense trouble of quarrying these heavy stones, transporting them by boat to the island, and then hauling them up the hill to this specific spot, all for the purpose of sealing this hole. This was the first piece of true engineering evidence. It elevated the site from a simple hiding spot to a deliberately sealed vault. The builders had not only wanted to hide something, they had wanted to create a barrier, to discourage and challenge anyone who might follow. And this first barrier was so solid, so formal. The three men looked at one another, the initial excitement in their hearts now tempered by a deeper sense of reverence. Using their pickaxes as levers, they began the laborious task of prying the flagstones loose. The stones were heavy, and moving each one was a struggle of straining muscles and coordinated effort. When the last stone was finally shifted aside, a clear, circular shaft, about 7 feet in diameter, was revealed beneath. The walls of the shaft were made of a hard, dense clay, and scored into their surface were the unmistakable marks of old pickaxes, parallel scratches, still visible in the damp earth after all this time. These marks were, like the signatures of the builders, a silent testament to the shaft's purely artificial origin. Now, they stood at the entrance to a true mystery. The first seal had been broken, but what lay below? The very existence of this cap, made of stone from another shore, was a powerful message. It told the three discoverers that they were dealing with something far more significant than a simple pirate's chess. The planning, the resources, and the sheer will of the creators were far beyond anything they could have imagined. This moment marked the transition of their quest from one of discovery to one of deconstruction. They were no longer just looking for a spot, they were now dismantling a structure. Every inch they dug from this point forward would be a conversation with an unknown, intelligent mind from the past. You can imagine their feelings as they stood at the edge of the pit, peering down into the profound darkness. The air was filled with the rich, loamy scent of earth that had not seen the light of day for centuries. Their adventure had only just begun, and this simple puzzle of stone was merely the opening phrase of a much larger, more complex composition. Having removed the heavy stone seal, McGinn, Smith, and Vaughan stood at the lip of the open shaft, peering into the darkness below. A cool, earthy breath rose from the pit, carrying the scent of damp clay and centuries of stillness. Was only just beginning. The fill inside the shaft was loose and dark, a stark contrast to the hard packed clay of the walls, which made the digging relatively easy. They devised a simple system. Using a sturdy rope and a wooden bucket, one man would descend into the pit to dig, filling the bucket with earth. The two on the surface would then haul it up hand over hand and empty its contents into a growing pile nearby. Monotonous process, but with every bucket of dirt removed, they were descending further into the unknown, closer to the heart of the secret. Sunlight could only penetrate the first few feet of the shaft, leaving the depths in a profound gloom. They may have lit a pine-resin torch or a simple lantern, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the narrow walls, illuminating the fine dust that hung in the air. The atmosphere inside the pit was a mixture of soil, sweat, and the sharp, clean scent of burning pine. Inch by inch they worked their way downward. Time seemed to lose its meaning, measured only by the rhythmic scrape of the spade and the creak of the rope. They dug past 5 feet, then 8. When they had reached a depth of approximately 10 feet, about 3 meters, or twice the height of a tall man, Digger's spade once again struck something solid. It was another dull thud, but this sound was different from the sharp clink of hitting stone. It was softer, more resonant, with the unmistakable echo of wood. They carefully cleared away the final layer of dirt, their anticipation building with every movement. What they uncovered was a structure that was baffling and deeply impressive. Stretching across the entire width of the shaft was a platform of thick, heavy oak logs. They had been laid side by side, fitting snugly together and embedded firmly into the clay walls, sealing the shaft completely. The wood was ancient, stained a deep, dark brown, almost black from its long burial in the damp earth. The outer surfaces were slick with moisture and had begun to soften with rot, but when they tested the logs with a pick, they found the cores were still incredibly solid. This discovery filled them with a mixture of excitement and confusion. It was another definitive piece of proof that this shaft was a deliberate, careful construction. But it was also perplexing. Why would anyone go to the trouble of building such a substantial wooden barrier 10 feet underground? It was clearly not a treasure chest, nor was it the end of their search. It was itself another obstacle. This platform was the first clue that hinted at a system, a repeating design. The builders, it seemed, were following a preconceived plan. The flagstones were the first layer of the puzzle. This oak platform was the second. The logic and patience behind such a construction began to send a small, quiet chill through the three men. This was not just about hiding something, it was about testing, or perhaps exhausting, anyone who tried to find it. It took them a great deal of effort, using axes and pry bars, to dismantle the platform. Splinters of dark suddenwood mixed with the soil hauled up bucket by bucket to join the growing pile on the surface. When the platform was finally removed, they noticed a curious detail: the earth directly beneath where the logs had been seemed to have settled, creating a small void of about 2 feet. This suggested that after the platform was installed and the shaft above it was filled, the loose dirt below had compacted over a very long period of time, causing it to sink. This small detail was a whisper from the past, hinting at the great age of the structure. With the first platform gone, they resumed their descent. The air grew cooler and more humid. Tiny beads of moisture began to seep from the clay walls, glistening in the torchlight. Their minds raced with new theories. Perhaps the next platform would be the last one. Perhaps the 10-foot interval was just a feint, and the real prize was just a little further down. They dug another 10 feet, reaching a depth of 20 feet below the surface. And then it happened again. The unmistakable sound of a spade hitting wood. After clearing the soil, they found themselves standing on a second platform of oak logs identical to the first, and embedded just as securely into the walls of the pit. At that moment, any remaining excitement may have begun to curdle into a profound, almost weary sense of awe. This was not a simple puzzle, it was a pattern. A cold, deliberate, and patient pattern. It was as if the builders were speaking to them across the centuries. Their message conveyed not in words but in labor. "You have removed one barrier," the structure seemed to say, "but I have another. And after that, another still." This repetition had a hypnotic quality. It suggested that the path ahead was long and, in a strange way, predictable. They would face the same challenge. But this predictability did not diminish the mystery. Instead, it added a layer of obsessive, almost fanatical, engineering. You can imagine them there, 20 feet deep in the earth, looking up at the small circle of sky framed by the mouth of the pit. They were surrounded by cold, damp clay, standing on yet another formidable wooden obstacle. The shaft was beginning to feel less like a hole and more like a vertical labyrinth, where every step forward was met with the same repeating wall. This discovery transformed the Oak Island secret. It was no longer a mystery of place but a mystery of pattern. The crucial question was no longer simply, where is the treasure? It was now, how many times will this pattern repeat? We last left Daniel McGinn and his friends standing 20 feet deep in the earth, confronted by the second of the mysterious oak platforms. It was a discovery that had shifted their understanding of the task before them. This was not a simple dig, it was the deconstruction of a deliberate, repeating pattern. Though a sense of weary awe had begun to settle in their hearts, the powerful allure of the unknown and the persistent dream of treasure urged them onward. Once more, they set to the grueling work of dismantling the barrier. The process was the same as before, a slow battle of leverage and strength, filled with the sounds of splintering wood and strained breathing. The dark, waterlogged oak was hauled out of the pit, piece by piece, joining the growing pile of its predecessors on the surface, a small, dark monument to their progress. The deeper they went, the more the world above seemed to recede. The sun became a distant, pale coin in a circle of blue sky. The air grew colder, heavier, and the damp clay walls seemed to press in on them. The only light and warmth came from their flickering torch, casting long, distorted shadows that made the narrow space feel both intimate and immense. They continued their descent, digging through another 10 feet of packed earth. On the surface, 10 feet is merely a few paces, but in this vertical, confined world, it was a vast distance, each inch won through sheer physical exertion. And then, as they reached a depth of 30 feet, the predictable happened once more. A spade struck wood. The third oak platform, identical to the two before it, lay waiting, another silent guardian blocking their path. This time, there was likely little surprise, but rather a profound sense of confirmation. They now fully understood the logic of the shaft, at least as far as they had uncovered it. It was a system, an engineered defense with a barrier placed at every 10-foot interval. This realization extinguished any lingering hope of an easy discovery. The treasure, whatever it was not meant to be found easily. The builders, with an almost stubborn resolve, had ensured that anyone who dared to approach their secret must pay a commensurate price in effort and will. Standing there, 30 feet down, the equivalent of looking down from the roof of a 3-story building, they had reached a critical point. The physical toll was immense, but a heavier weight was settling upon them, the psychological pressure of the unknown. The scale of this project was now clearly far beyond what 3 men with simple hand tools could hope to conquer. They managed to remove the third platform and dug a few feet further, but they were forced to confront a series of hard realities. Their resources, their strength, their simple equipment, their time were stretched to the breaking point. Lifting buckets of soil from such a depth was becoming increasingly difficult and dangerous. The stability of the clay walls, unsupported for so long, was becoming a quiet concern, but most importantly, they had no idea how long this pattern would continue. 40 feet, 50, 100. At this depth, surrounded by the cold, silent earth, they made a difficult but wise decision: to pause their excavation. This pause marks the end of the first chapter in the long story of the Oak Island treasure hunt. It was the end of the age of amateur exploration. Smith and Vaughan, the 3 original discoverers, had, with their own hands and driven by pure curiosity, peeled back the first few layers of the mystery. They had confirmed the existence of the shaft and its basic repeating structure, but they had also come face to face with their own limitations. This puzzle, they now knew, required more. More money, more men, more advanced equipment. After covering the mouth of the pit to conceal it from casual view, they walked away from the clearing that had consumed their summer and their dreams. This decision also marked the beginning of another crucial phase. In order to find help, they had to share their story. And from that moment on, the secret of Oak Island was no longer theirs alone. It began to travel, carried on whispers and rumors through the small communities along Mahan Bay, passed from one person to another in taverns and at firesides. As the story was told and retold, it inevitably grew, embellished by imagination and speculation. The rough acts of the dig slowly softened into legend. The abandoned, 30-foot steep hole became something more in the telling. A money pit, a place of immense and mysterious promise. For the next 7 or 8 years, the island returned to its quiet slumber. The covered pit waited patiently. The wind still sighed through the oaks, and the tides still rose and fell with their ancient rhythm. A great question mark was buried beneath the island's tranquility. Both McGinn and Smith eventually bought property and built homes on the island, choosing to live out their lives beside the very secret they had unearthed but could not possess. Looking out at that particular spot in the woods, their hearts filled with a unique mixture of frustration and enduring hope. This long pause was essential for the legend to take root and grow. It allowed the story to spread, to capture the imagination of others with greater means. It was like an intermission in a grand play, giving the audience time to absorb the first act and build anticipation for what was to come. And the next act would be staged by a new and better equipped cast of characters. A formal company, backed by wealth and influence, would soon return to this abandoned pit, ready to continue the unfinished work. For nearly 8 years, a quiet stillness reclaimed the eastern end of Oak Island. The money pit, covered and concealed, slept beneath the forest floor. The seasons turned, winters buried the island in snow, and summers dressed it in a deep, heavy green. The three original discoverers, Daniel McGinnis, John Smith, and Anthony Vaughan, were no longer boys filled with adventurous fire. They were men, husbands and fathers, who had settled into the rhythm of island life, forever living in the shadow of the secret they had unearthed but could not conquer. But a story, once told, takes on a life of its own. Like a seed carried on the wind, the tale of the money pit drifted from the island. It was whispered in the taverns of Western Shore, shared over hearths in the long winter nights, and passed between sailors in the harbours of Mahan Bay. It grew with each telling, the oak platforms becoming more formidable, the promise of what lay beneath more dazzling. The story travelled inland, carried by the slow commerce of the day. One version of how it spread has a particularly gentle, human touch. It is said that when John Smith's wife was expecting their first child, she travelled to the larger town of Truro, Nova Scotia, to be in the care of a doctor named John Linds. During that time, the story of the strange pit on Oak Island was shared, a fascinating tale from a remote island. The story captured the doctor's imagination, and through him, it reached the ears of a relative, a man of considerable wealth and influence named Simeon Linds. Simeon Linds was a man of a different caliber from the island farmers. He was a merchant, accustomed to seeing the world not just as it was, but in terms of its potential. He heard the story not as a frightening local legend, but as a credible report of a major undertaking. The scale of the engineering, the deliberate, repeating platforms, it all spoke to him of something of immense value, protected with immense care. He saw not a curse, but an opportunity. Around the year 1803, Linds decided to act. He sought out the original discoverers and, with his vision and financial backing, brought together a syndicate of other prominent and wealthy men. The group included Colonel Robert Archibald and Sheriff Thomas Harris, men of standing and means. Together, they formed a proper company with a single clear objective: to raise the necessary capital, gather the right equipment, and apply a systematic scientific approach to solving the Oak Island mystery. They named of their new venture the Onslow Company. The formation of the Onslow Company marks a pivotal moment in the island's history. The hunt was transformed. It was no longer a personal quest fueled by youthful curiosity. It was now an organized commercial enterprise. The money pit was, for the first time, officially an investment. The members of the company put forth their own money, and they expected a return. This new dynamic brought a fresh wave of energy and resources to the island, but it also introduced a new kind of pressure. They were digging not just for answers, but for profit. In the summer of 1804, the Onslow Company arrived on Oak Island in force. You can imagine the scene. Boats landed at Smith's Cove, their hulls heavy with tools, lumber, ropes, and provisions. The quiet of the island, which had been disturbed only by the wind and waves for 8 years, was now broken by the sounds of men and industry. The original discoverers, McGinnis, Smith, and Vaughan, were there, but their roles had changed. They were now the guides, the consultants, the keepers of the original story. They lead the newcomers through the familiar woods, back to the clearing on the island's eastern high ground. They pulled back the branches and earth that had hidden the pit's entrance, and the dark, quiet mouth of the shaft was once again exposed to the light of day. This time, the operation was different. It was professional. Sturdy scaffolding was erected over the pit. A more efficient system for lifting earth, a horse-powered winch known as a gin, was assembled. The rhythmic creak of the winch and the steady commands to the horse replaced the simple silence of men pulling on a rope. Their team included experienced miners who knew how to shore up the walls of a shaft to prevent collapse. More robust, more serious than what had come before, a new atmosphere of confident optimism settled over the clearing. The members of the Onslow Company, standing at the edge of the pit, were filled with a sense of purpose. They believed that with their superior funding, equipment, and determination, they would surely succeed where the three young men had been forced to stop. They were about to resume the conversation with the past, to engage in a new contest of wills with those mysterious, ancient builders. This moment set a pattern that would repeat for the next 2 centuries: a hopeful beginning, an ambitious plan, and a group of new dreamers drawn by the irresistible gravity of the mystery, ready to invest their time, their fortunes, and their very spirits into unlocking the island's secret. Let us rest for a moment in that renewed sense of hope. The air itself seems to crackle with a new energy. The sounds of preparation and quiet, confident conversation mingle with the timeless whisper of the forest. A new chapter was about to begin. The Onslow Company was ready to dig deeper than anyone had before, and in doing so, they would uncover clues far stranger and more baffling than simple platforms of oak. The Unsolved company, with its organized crew and horse-powered machinery, began its work in the summer of 1804 with a powerful sense of purpose. They descended quickly through the familiar territory of the Money Pit, clearing the first 30 feet of earth with a professional efficiency that the original 3 discoverers could only have dreamed of. The oak platforms at 10, 20, and 30 feet were dismantled and removed, their dark, waterlogged timbers confirming the stories that had drawn these new investors to the island. But as they pushed past the 30-foot mark, they were entering a new and unknown realm. Every shovel-full of earth brought them deeper into a mystery that had been silent for centuries. The air in the shaft grew cooler, the light from above more distant. All eyes were on the work, every man holding his breath in anticipation of what would come next. At 40 feet, they found the 4th oak platform, just as the established pattern suggested they would. The cold, repeating logic of the pit's design was holding true, but this time, there was something new. Spread across the top of the wooden logs was a thick, uniform layer of charcoal. It was not the scattered remnants of an old fire, but a deliberate stratum laid with the same care as the platforms themselves. The discovery of the charcoal added a new texture to the mystery. Matte blackness seemed to absorb the flickering torchlight, creating a pocket of profound darkness in the pit. As the workers cleared it away, a fine, black dust filled the air, coating their hands and faces as if they were touching the very ashes of a long miner's extinguished secret. Why was it here? Was it a simple desiccant, a layer of carbon intended to absorb moisture and preserve whatever lay beneath? Or did it hold some other, more symbolic meaning? In many ancient cultures, charcoal was used for purification, a filter for both the physical and the spiritual. In this carefully constructed shaft, felt less like a practical choice and more like a ritual element, adding a whisper of ancient ceremony to the cold engineering. They broke through the charcoal in the 4th platform. Their resolve hardened. The pit was no longer just a series of repeating obstacles, it was a complex, evolving puzzle. They continued their descent. At 50 feet, they encountered the 5th platform, and here another surprise awaited them. This time, the layer was not of charcoal but of a strange, thick, putty-like substance. It was a grayish, fibrous material that had been carefully troweled into the gaps between the oak logs, creating a nearly perfect waterproof seal. It was still pliable after all this time, a testament to its unusual composition. Later analysis would suggest it was a mixture of clay, sand, and possibly eelgrass, a common marine plant, but to the men of the Unsolved company, it was simply another layer of baffling ingenuity. This discovery was a revelation. It spoke directly to the builders' advanced understanding of their environment. They were not just setting barriers, they were actively fighting against the slow, persistent seepage of groundwater. This putty was the 18th-century equivalent of modern caulking, a clear and deliberate attempt to keep the lower levels of the shaft dry. This detail electrified the investors. It was the strongest evidence here that they were approaching something of immense value, something that needed to be protected not just from discovery, but from the very elements themselves. With renewed vigor, they pushed onward, deeper into the earth. At 60 feet, they found the 6th platform, and it was here that they made the most astonishing, the most geographically impossible discovery to date. Mixed in with the earth above this platform was a thick matting of strange, fibrous material. It was light brown, tough, and unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was certainly not from any local plant. As they brought bucket to cast of it to the surface, spreading it out in the sunlight, some of the more well-traveled men in the company recognized it. The recognition came with a jolt of disbelief. It was coconut fiber. Let us pause for a moment to appreciate the sheer impossibility of this. Coconuts grow in the tropics thousands of miles away from the cold, rocky shores of Nova Scotia. In an age of sail, transporting a significant quantity of coconut husks from the Caribbean or beyond to this remote Canadian island, and then burying it 60 feet underground, was an undertaking of immense logistical complexity and expense. This single discovery shattered every simple theory. This could not be the work of a local pirate hiding a few chests of gold. A common pirate would have neither nor the motive for such an elaborate and exotic construction. The coconut fiber was a message from a distant world. It spoke of a group with vast resources, extensive seafaring knowledge, and a global reach. Why use it? Perhaps for its superior drainage and filtration properties. In tropical climates, coconut fiber was often used to line wells and drains as it allowed water to pass through, while filtering out sand and silt. Was it possible the builders were anticipating a water problem? Was this another component of a larger, more complex system? The presence of this sun-drenched, tropical material in the cold, damp darkness of the pit created a surreal and powerful contrast. It was a clue that was completely out of place, a definitive link to a world far beyond Mahan Bay. For the members of the Unsolved company, these strange layers, the charcoal, the putty, the coconut fiber were no longer just obstacles. They were a narrative. They were a geological diary left by the builders. Each layer told a part of the story, revealing another facet of their incredible foresight and skill. They felt they were no longer just digging, they were reading a story written in earth and wood and exotic plant matter. And every line of that story told them to keep going. Even greater secrets must surely be waiting. After the astonishing discovery of the coconut fiber, a new and almost feverish energy gripped the Unsolved company. They were no longer just digging, they felt. They were following a trail of breadcrumbs, each one more exotic and promising than the last. The work intensified. They dismantled the platform at 60 feet, then continued their descent into the earth. The repeating pattern of oak platforms, which had once seemed so daunting, now felt like a countdown. 70 feet, then 80 feet at each level. Another platform was found, dismantled, and hauled away. The pit had become a deep, narrow throat leading into the heart of the island, and with every foot they descended, the men felt they were drawing closer to its secret. Finally, in the late summer of 1804, their shovels and picks brought them to a depth of 90 feet. Here, they encountered the 9th recorded oak platform. As they began to clear the packed earth from its surface, their tools struck something different. It was not the familiar, yielding resistance of wood, nor the soft give of soil. Flat and yielding surface that returned a solid, dull clink of stone on metal. The workers paused, their movements becoming more careful, more deliberate. They gently scraped and brushed away the surrounding dirt, their lanterns and torches held close. Slowly, a large rectangular slab of stone emerged from the gloom. It was immense, roughly 3 feet long and about 1.5 feet wide, and nearly a foot thick. It lay flat upon the oak logs, or was perhaps embedded within them, a deliberate and final feeling seal. The stone itself was unlike any they had seen on the island. It was a dark olive tinged color, its surface polished smooth, suggesting a type of hard porphyry or granite. It was clearly not a random field stone, but a piece of rock that had been carefully chosen, shaped and finished. It was not a barrier, it was a plaque. As they angled their torches to better illuminate its surface, a collective hush fell over the men in the pit. There, etched into the stone, was a line of strange, cryptic characters. They were not letters of any known alphabet, but a mysterious collection of geometric shapes, dots, lines and symbols, triangles, crosses and other figures that seemed to form a secret language. This was the 90-foot stone, a discovery that would become one of the most famous and enduring legends in the Oak Island saga. Let us linger in that moment. Imagine the scene deep in the earth in a narrow, damp and dimly lit shaft. A group of men, their faces smudged with dirt and sweat, are gathered around a stone tablet covered in an ancient, unreadable script. The flickering light of their torches seems to make the symbols dance and shift, as if they were alive with the secret they held. The only sound is the dripping of water from the clay walls and the soft sound of their own breathing. For the first time, the builders of this pit were no longer speaking through the silent language of engineering. It was a direct communication from the past, a riddle presented without a key. What did the symbols say? Was it a warning, a set of instructions, or was it the final incantation needed to unlock the treasure? With great care and effort, the members of the Unsolved company managed to hoist the heavy stone, weighing nearly 200 pounds, out of the pit. On the surface, in the clear light of day, they gathered around it again, studying the strange inscription, but no one could decipher its meaning. It was a language lost to time, or one that had always been meant only for the initiated. The stone would later be taken by John Smith and, for a time, built into the fireplace of his new home on the island, where it was said to have been viewed by hundreds of curious visitors over the years. It became a tangible piece of the legend, a solid, physical anchor for the growing myth. But for now, its message remained a mystery. And yet, for the men of the Unsolved company in 1804, the stone was a profound victory. They did not need to understand the words to grasp their significance. The stone was a signpost, a clear and undeniable marker that said, "You are on the right path. The prize is near." Their spirits soared. They were convinced that they were now only feet, perhaps inches, away from the vast fortune they had sought for so long. They decided to probe the ground beneath where the stone had rested. One of the men took up a long iron crowbar and plunged it into the soft, damp earth at the bottom of the pit. The bar slid down easily for several feet, and then it struck something hard. It was not the jarring stop of hitting bedrock. It was a firm, resilient, and broad surface that returned a deep, resonant thump through the iron bar, the unmistakable feeling of striking a wooden chest. They probed again, a few inches over, and again, the same result. They were certain of it. They had found the vaults. It was a Saturday evening. The air was filled with a triumphant, almost giddy excitement. They had reached the end of their quest. After months of toil, after breaking through layer after layer of ingenious defenses, they stood at the very threshold of the treasure chamber. The entire secret of Oak Island was about to be revealed. They made the decision to rest. They would leave the island for the Sabbath and return on Monday morning for the final, glorious excavation. You can feel their elation. The quiet, confident joy of men who believe their fortunes are made. They had solved a puzzle. They had won. But the guardian of Oak Island, whether it was the spirit of the builders or the very nature of the island itself, had one final, devastating surprise in store. A defense mechanism far more clever and far more powerful than any platform of wood or stone was waiting silently in the darkness, ready to be triggered. On that hopeful Saturday evening, the members of the Unsolved company left Oak Island and returned to the mainland to rest, their hearts alight with the certainty of imminent success. The air of the coming Sunday felt different, charged with promise. They had done it. They had persevered where others had failed, descending 90 feet into the earth, uncovering a cryptic message on a polished stone, and most thrillingly feeling the solid thump of what could only be treasure chests beneath their probing iron rod. Success was not a distant dream, it was a tangible reality, waiting just a few hours away. You can imagine their conversations that night, spoken in low, excited tones. They were no longer speculating, they were planning. The wealth they were about to unearth would change their lives, their families' lives, for generations. The long, arduous months of digging, the endless buckets of dirt, the damp chill of the pit, it had all been worth it. They had met the challenge of the ancient builders and had won. When Monday morning finally dawned, bright and clear, they made their way back to the island. There was a lightness in their step, a quiet confidence in their demeanor. The boat ride across the bay, the familiar walk through the woods to the clearing, it all felt like the final ceremonial procession to their victory. They approached the money pit, ready to begin the last and most rewarding phase of their work. Silent shock washed over them. The scene that greeted their eyes was one of utter, baffling transformation. The deep, dark, earthy hole they had left just 2 days prior was gone. In its place was a well, a deep, still and silent well, filled almost to the brim with water. The surface of the water lay about 30 feet from the top, a dark, glassy mirror reflecting the morning sky. Where there had been the promise of dry earth and wooden chests, there was now only this placid, impenetrable pool. For a long moment, they could only stare, their minds struggling to comprehend the silent, overnight catastrophe. There had been no storm, no sound. The water had simply appeared, a quiet and absolute invasion. Their disbelief quickly gave way to frantic action. This had to be a setback, not a defeat. They began the back-breaking work of bailing, lowering wooden buckets on ropes, hauling them up brimming with cold, murky water, and dumping them onto the surrounding earth. They worked with a desperate energy, but soon a dreadful realization began to dawn. Their efforts were futile. For every bucket of water they removed, another seemed to seep in from below to take its place. The water level in the pit remained stubbornly, maddeningly constant, as if it were connected to the vast, inexhaustible reservoir of the sea itself. This was the moment the true genius and the true cruelty of the Oak Island mystery was revealed. This was the first activation of the legendary flood trap. The members of the Unsolved company finally understood. The flagstones, the 9 oak platforms, the layers of charcoal and putty and coconut fiber, they were not the primary defense. They were merely the trigger. They were the elaborate, time-consuming prelude to the real security system water. It was a design of breathtaking ingenuity, a passive, automatic trap, lying in wait for centuries. By digging to a certain depth, by removing the final layers of clay and piercing the ground beneath the 90-foot stone, they had unwittingly sprung the lock, and the sea itself had come rushing in to protect its secret. This discovery elevated their perception of the builders to a new and almost terrifying level. These were not just clever pirates or determined merchants. These were master engineers, hydrologists who understood the principles of water pressure and who had the skill to construct a self-awareness activating system that would function perfectly hundreds of years after they had gone. The mystery was no longer one of archaeology or cryptography, it had become a grand and formidable problem of engineering. The question was no longer just what is buried here. In a time before modern machinery was this incredible system built. The Unsolved company was utterly defeated by this invisible, insurmountable barrier. In a last, desperate attempt, they began to dig a new shaft nearby, hoping to bypass the trap and tunnel into the money pit from the side. But when they reached a similar depth, the same thing happened. Water flooded their new shaft as well, confirming that this was not a localized leak, but a widespread, deliberate system. Having exhausted their funds, their energy, and their hope, the Unsolved company finally admitted defeat. In 1805, they abandoned their quest, leaving the island to its secrets. They were the first to truly glimpse the awesome scale of the island's defenses. They had solved the surface puzzles only to awaken the true guardian that slept in the darkness below. Let us leave the story here for tonight. Imagine that water-filled pit, a dark eye open to the sky, its surface calm and unrevealing. The secrets within are now veiled by an impenetrable layer of liquid, guarded by the very ocean that surrounds the island. Watery defeat has now become something far deeper, far more complex, and infinitely more compelling. After the dramatic failure of the Unsolved company, a long and watery silence fell over the money pit. The shaft, flooded and impassable, became a monument to a mystery that was deeper and more formidable than anyone had imagined. For nearly half a century, no major attempts were made to challenge its depths. The island returned to its quiet rhythms, the seasons turning over the abandoned worksite, slowly softening its sharp edges with moss and weeds. But a story, especially one as compelling as this, does not simply vanish. It lingers, and the most potent part of the story, the part that was passed from person to person in the decades that followed, was the tale of the 90-foot stone. Let us for a moment leave the muddy, water-filled pit and enter a quieter, more contemplative space. For many years, the stone itself had a home. John Smith, one of the original 3 discoverers, had carefully removed it from the dig site and, in an act of both pride and preservation, had built it into the stone hearth of his new house on the island. There it sat, a silent, enigmatic centerpiece in the heart of his home. You can imagine visitors on a cold winter's night, gathering by the warmth of the fire, their eyes drawn to that strange, dark stone. They would trace its smooth, polished surface with their fingers, trying to make sense of the cryptic symbols that stared back at them from within the flickering firelight. The stone was a tangible piece of the puzzle, a direct link to the unknown builders, but its message remained locked away. It was a story with no words, a silent promise. Decades passed. The story of the stone traveled, and eventually, it reached the ears of academics and scholars in the city of Halifax. Sometime in the 1860s, more than 50 years after the stone was unearthed, a professor of languages from Dalhousie University, a man named James Leachai, took a keen interest in the puzzle. According to the legend, the stone was brought to him for study. He examined the strange collection of triangles, crosses, and dots. He believed that it was not a complex lost language but something much simpler, a substitution cipher. A substitution cipher is one of the oldest forms of secret writing. The idea is wonderfully simple. You create a secret alphabet where each of our familiar letters is replaced by a unique symbol. A triangle might stand for A circle for B, a square for C, and so on. The message appears as gibberish to the outside world, but if you possess the key, the knowledge of which symbol corresponds to which letter, you can unlock its meaning. Professor Leachai, it was said, dedicated himself to cracking this code. He patiently tested different combinations, searching for a pattern, a logic that would turn the strange symbols into coherent words. And then one day he announced that he had succeeded. He had found the key. He had translated the message from the past. The translation he revealed was simple, direct, and possessed a power that would electrify the legend and fuel the treasure hunt for another century. According to Professor Leachai, the inscription on the stone read, 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. Let us just rest with those words for a moment. 40 feet below, a precise, actionable instruction. It transformed the pit from a bottomless enigma into a finite challenge. It told future searchers exactly how much further they had to go, £2 million. In the mid-19th century, this was a staggering, almost unimaginable fortune. It gave the treasure an aim and a number. It was no longer a vague pirate's hoard, it was a specific, life-altering prize. These words became a spell, an incantation of immense power. They shifted the focus of the Oak Island mystery from a puzzle of engineering and history to a wronged, irresistible quest for wealth. This translation provided a clear, intoxicating goal for all who would come after. They were no longer digging just to solve a riddle, they were digging for £2 million. And yet, as with all things on Oak Island, we must view this translation through a soft, gentle haze of uncertainty. The story of the translation is itself a legend. There are no surviving academic papers from Professor Leachai detailing his work. And what of the stone itself? Its fate is as mysterious as its inscription. It was eventually removed from the bookbinder's shop in Halifax, where it had been taken for study. It is said, the stone was used as a beating stone, a hard, flat surface on which bookbinders would hammer leather. Years of this heavy work may have worn the inscription away entirely. The stone then vanished from history, its current whereabouts unknown. So this famous translation, the very heart of the treasure legend, may not have been a true decipherment at all. It may have been a clever invention, a story created by shrewd promoters to breathe new life into a dormant quest. But in a strange way, it does not matter. True or not, the translation did its work perfectly. It became the most successful and enduring part of the Oak Island legend. It became a treasure in its own right, a treasure made of words and hope, one that could be endlessly spent and never depleted. It gave people a reason to keep trying, a dream they could measure in feet and in pounds. And that dream would soon draw a new generation of searchers back to the island, armed with new technology and an unshakable faith in the promise of that whispered translation. The failure of the Onslow Company and the dramatic story of the flood trap cast a long shadow over Oak Island. For nearly half a century, the money pit was left to its watery silence. The world moved on. A new generation was born, grew up, and had children of their own. But the story did not die. It became a fixture of Nova Scotian folklore, a grand and cautionary tale told and retold, and at its heart, that whispered translation 40 feet below, £2 million are buried, continued to smoulder like a stubborn ember, waiting for a fresh wind to fan it back into a flame. That wind came in 1849. It was an age of gold rushes and feverish speculation. While thousands of dreamers were heading west to the gold fields of California, a new group of investors in Nova Scotia turned their gaze to the east, to that small, unassuming island in Mahon Bay. A new syndicate was formed, taking its name from the town where the dream was rekindled, the Truro Company. Like their predecessors, they were a group of determined, well-financed men who had studied the history of the pit and believed they could succeed where the Onslow Company had failed. They were armed not only with capital, but with the lessons learned from the past. They knew about the flood trap. They knew the water was their primary enemy. When the Truro Company arrived on the island, they found the site much as it had been left 50 years before. The money pit was a still, quiet pool of water. They made their own attempts to drain it, perhaps with better pumps and more manpower, but the result was the same. The water remained an impassable liquid shield. The pit would not yield its secrets to brute force, but the Truro Company brought something new to the island, not just more men or more money, but a new way of thinking, born of frustration. If they could not go down into the pit themselves, perhaps they could send a messenger. If they could not drain the water to see what lay beneath, perhaps they could find a way to feel it. The new tool they brought for this purpose was a massive, hand-cranked platform auger. Let us take a moment to picture this ingenious device. It was, in essence, a giant corkscrew designed to probe the earth. It consisted of a series of long iron rods that could be screwed together, one after another, to reach great depths. At the very end was a large, spiral-shaped drill head, designed to bite into the soil. To operate it, the workers constructed a sturdy wooden platform over the mouth of the flooded pit. The long drill rod passed through a hole in the center of the platform, and at the top, a huge horizontal cross-bar was attached. Pushing together like farmers grinding grain would slowly, painstakingly turn the entire apparatus. With each full rotation, the auger's head would screw itself a little deeper into the earth below. This was a slow, laborious, and intensely tactile process. It marked a fundamental shift in the methodology of the treasure hunt. The era of direct excavation was over, the era of indirect probing had begun. The searchers could no longer use their eyes to see or their hands to touch. All the information they could gather would now come through the long, iron nerve of the drill rod, transmitted in the form of subtle vibrations, changes in resistance, and faint, scraping sounds. The man operating the auger became a kind of physician, using this long, metal probe to diagnose the unseen layers of the earth. He had to develop an intuitive feel for the work, a deep sensitivity to the language of the drill. Through the feedback in the cross-bar, he could learn to distinguish the soft, yielding texture of mud from the firm, gritty resistance of clay. And he would listen, always listen, for the stale shudder and grating sound that meant the drill had encountered wood. This new method brought with it a new kind of mystery. The truth was no longer a scene to be uncovered, but a series of fragmented clues to be brought up from the depths clinging to the blades of the auger. What they could learn was entirely dependent on what the sticky clay and the twisting metal happened to bring to the surface. The long, slow process of raising the auger began. As the final section emerged from the water, its drill head coated in mud and clay, the entire crew would gather around, peering intently at the sample, searching for any sign, any fragment that was not of the natural earth. This blind probing was a process steeped in uncertainty. It relied heavily on the interpretation and the faith of the searchers. A single wood chip, a smear of unusually colored clay, anything could be seized upon as a significant clue. Hope and disappointment were now measured in the turn of a screw and the contents of a drill head. Tonight, let us settle into this slow, rhythmic, and patient work. Imagine the men on the platform, walking in a slow, steady circle, their combined strength turning the great drill. In your mind, the auger descends, foot by foot, through the dark, silent water, leaving the world of light and air behind. It passes the 30-foot mark, then 50, then 80, entering the depths where the Onslow Company had been so dramatically defeated. It is now a silent messenger, traveling into a realm no human had ever reached, poised to touch the secrets that lay sleeping in the waterlogged darkness. The Truro Company's great auger continued its slow and patient work through the summer of 1849, a silent, twisting messenger sent down into the waterlogged heart of the money pit. The men on the platform above walked their endless circle, their world reduced to the feel of the wooden cross minus bar in their hands and the faint, minus stale vibrations that traveled up the long aisle from the darkness below. Each turn of the auger was an act of faith. They were charting the unseen world by touch alone, building a map in their minds from the language of resistance and sound. According to the records left by the company, their drill having passed the 90-foot mark where the Onslow Company had been so dramatically defeated, entered a new and uncharted territory. At a depth of 90-8 feet, roughly 30 meters down, the auger's steady progress was met with the familiar, fibrous resistance of wood. When they eventually raised the drill, the chips clinging to its blades were identified not as oak, but as spruce. This small detail suggested a change in the builder's methods, a different choice of material for these deeper layers. After grinding its way through the spruce platform, the drill bit suddenly dropped, for about 12 inches. There was no resistance at all, a sensation of falling through an empty space. This was the confirmation of the small voids found by the very first diggers, the pockets of air created by the slow, centuries-long settling of the earth beneath the platforms. It was another whisper of the pit's great age. Then, the auger hit wood again, this time another layer of oak. The men pushed on, turning the great cross minus bar, and after breaking through this oak platform, they encountered something entirely new. The feedback coming up the iron rod changed. It was no longer the resilient toughness of wood or the soft yielding of clay. Jarring and inconsistent grinding, a sound that spoke of something fragmented and dense. When they painstakingly raised the auger to the surface to inspect the bit, they found it coated in the usual mud and clay, but embedded within it were tiny, gleaming specks of metal. The company's logbook described this layer with a simple, electrifying phrase: metal in pieces. The discovery sent a ripple of excitement through the camp. For the first time they had recovered something other than wood, stone and earth from these profound depths. What were these fragments? Were they the iron bands from a treasure chest, the scattered remnants of coins, or something else entirely? No one could say for sure, but the mere presence of metal was a powerful tonic. It was proof of a man-made deposit, and it convinced them that they were drilling directly into the treasure vault itself. They continued their descent. The auger passed through another layer of oak, then another of spruce. At a depth well over 100 feet, the drill entered a thick, soft, and unusually colored layer of blue-ish clay. It was a sticky, tenacious substance, different from any of the natural clay on the island, and it clung to the auger head, making the work of turning and retrieving the drill incredibly difficult. After a long and arduous struggle to pull the auger up from this deep, clinging layer, a moment occurred that would be forever enshrined in the legend of Oak Island. As the drill head finally emerged into the sunlight, caked in the strange blue clay, something caught the light. Nestled in the twists of the iron auger were several tiny, gleaming objects. The workers gathered around, their voices hushed. With gentle fingers they carefully extracted the items from the clay and wiped them clean. Lying in the palm of a man's hand were 3 small links of a chain, each about the size of a paperclip, wrought from what appeared to be pure gold. Gold. The word itself seemed to hang in the air, shimmering like the object it described. A suppressed cheer went through the camp. This was it. This was the first, undeniable piece of the treasure itself, brought up from the watery darkness. It was only a few small links, but their significance was immeasurable. It was proof. Proof that the stories were true. Proof that their investment, their labor, and their unwavering hope had not been in vain. It seemed to confirm the promise of the 90-foot stone and its whispered translation. There really was a fortune buried here. And yet, as we rest in this moment of triumph, we must also hold it with a gentle sense of caution. For the story of these gold links, like so much else on Oak Island, is wrapped in a soft fog of uncertainty. Aside from the Truro Company's own logs and the later accounts that drew from them, no independent, third-party evidence exists to verify this find. The gold links, like the inscribed stone before them, have since vanished from history, lost to time. Skeptics both then and now have quietly pointed out that in an age of rampant speculation, a treasure-hunting company, desperate to maintain the confidence of its investors and attract new capital, would have a powerful motive to create such a discovery. The cost of a few links of gold chain would be insignificant compared to the vast expense of the expedition, but the hope and publicity such a find would generate would be priceless. We can never know the absolute truth. Were these few links of gold the first fruits of an ancient treasure, or a clever deception planted to keep a modern dream alive? This is the very essence of the Oak Island mystery. Every crucial piece of evidence is veiled. It offers you hope, but it also offers you doubt. It asks you to believe, but never give you the comfort of certainty. Tonight, you can hold this beautiful contradiction in your mind. Imagine those few links of gold, reclaimed from 100 feet beneath the earth, lying cool and heavy in your palm, still bearing the faint blue traces of the clay that held them for so long. Feel the weight of the metal, and the even greater weight of the unprobable hope it represents. For the Truro Company, however, there was no doubt. This discovery solidified their resolve. They were no longer just searching, they were recovering. And with this newfound certainty, they would turn their attention to the island's greatest challenge, the water itself. The few small links of gold chain, recovered from the deep, clinging clay of the money pit, had a profound effect on the men of the Truro Company. Hope was no longer an abstract concept, it was a tangible, gleaming metal. They now felt certain that a vast treasure lay just beyond their reach, separated from them only by that stubborn, silent column of water. Their determination, fueled by this tangible proof, now hardened into a singular focus. They had to defeat the water. They decided to try a strategy that had been attempted before, but this time with more knowledge and resolve. They would not attack the water head-on. They would try to go around it. The plan was to sink a new shaft, 100 feet or so away from the money pit, but to dig this one deeper, well below the level where the flooding occurred. From the bottom of this new, dry shaft, they would then excavate a horizontal tunnel, driving it sideways through the earth until it intercepted the money pit beneath the treasure chests, bypassing the flood trap entirely. It was an ambitious and exhausting plan. The work of digging a second deep shaft was immense, but the dream of gold drove them on. Day after day, they labored hauling up earth, timbering the new shaft, and descending deeper into the island. But as they reached a depth of over 100 feet and began to drive their tunnel horizontally toward the money pit, disaster struck again. A sudden torrent of water, cold and violent, burst through the tunnel wall. Their new shaft was also flooded to the same level as the first. The failure was crushing, but in this second defeat, a crucial piece of the puzzle finally clicked into place. They took samples of the water from this new flood. They analyzed it, tasted it. It was seawater. And then, through several days of careful and patient observation, they confirmed what they had long suspected. The water level in the pits was not static. It rose and fell, subtly but measurably imperfect, rhythmic sympathy with the tides of Mahon Bay. When the tide was high in the ocean, the water in the pits was at its highest. The water level dropped by a few inches. This was the definitive breakthrough. The water in the money pit was not coming from some isolated, underground spring or a static reservoir that could eventually be drained. The pit was physically connected to the Atlantic Ocean. The flood trap was not just a feature, it was a dynamic, living system breathing in time with the sea. This realization changed everything. The men of the Truro Company understood that playing a game of cat and mouse with the water at the pit's edge was pointless. As long as the great, invisible faucet connecting them to the ocean remained open, they could never hope to empty the shaft. And so, for the first time in the history of the search, the focus shifted. The question was no longer, what is in the pit? It was now, how does the water get into the pit? This new question sent them away from the dark, obsessive focus of the money pit and out into the wider landscape of the island itself. They became detectives, their investigation expanding from a single point to the entire perimeter of the island. You can imagine them, no longer digging down but walking the surface, their eyes scanning the coastline, searching for any anomaly, any clue that might betray the location of the flood system's intake. They walked the rocky shores, pushed through the dense undergrowth of the forest edge, and paced the quiet, sandy coves, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Their search eventually led them to a small, crescent minor-shaped inlet on the island's eastern shore. It was a peaceful, unremarkable place, a gently sloping beach of sand and smooth, grey stones. This was Smith's Cove, so named because it was part of the land owned by John Smith, one of the original discoverers. At high tide, the sea would cover the beach completely, its waters lapping at the edge of the trees. The water would retreat more than 100 feet, leaving behind a wide, wet, glistening expanse of sand. And it was here, while watching the slow retreat of the tide, that the men of the Truro Company noticed something strange. The water did not seem to drain from the beach evenly. In one particular area, it seemed to vanish into the sand much more quickly than in the surrounding sections, as if it were being drawn downward by an unseen drain. It was a subtle effect, one that a casual observer would never notice. But to these men, whose minds were now singularly focused on the movement of water, it was a profound clue. A new theory began to form, a daring and hopeful idea. What if the intake for the flood tunnel was not a deep, hidden channel in the bay, but something much closer, something hidden just beneath the surface of this very beach? They decided they had to find out. They would have to hold back the ocean itself to look. Their new plan was as audacious as it was difficult. They would build a wall in the sea, a temporary dam known as a cofferdam, to seal off a section of Smith's Cove from the bay. Then they would pump the enclosed area dry and dig up the beach to see what secrets it held. The quest was moving to a new stage. The battle would no longer be fought in the dark, confined space of the pit, but here, in the open air on the shore, in a direct contest with the immense and relentless power of the tide. Let us rest here tonight, on the quiet shore of Smith's Cove. The men of the Truro Company stand looking out at the beach, their minds filled with a new and fragile hope. They believe the answer to the island's greatest engineering mystery is buried just a few feet beneath the sand, and they are about to challenge the ocean to reveal it. Having finally understood that they were not fighting a simple leak but a dynamic system connected to the sea, the Truro Company turned its full attention to Smith's Cove. The subtle, accelerated draining of water from the beach at low tide was the most promising clue they had. It was a whisper of a hidden drain, and they were determined to make it speak. Their new plan was the most audacious yet conceived on the island. They would not try to outmine us, pump the ocean, they would try to wall it off. The undertaking was immense. They began the construction of a cofferdam, a temporary crescent-shaped wall built directly on the beach, designed to hold back the powerful tides of Mahon Bay and create a dry workspace on the seabed itself. It was a monumental struggle against nature. Men hauled heavy timbers and tons of clay, driving piles deep into the sand while the sea relentlessly tried to reclaim its territory. With waves crashing against their nascent structure, testing its strength, trying to pull it apart, but with dogged persistence, they succeeded. They built a sturdy, arcing wall 140-5 feet long, that finally sealed off a section of the cove from the bay. With the dam holding firm, they brought in pumps and began the slow process of emptying the water from the enclosed area. As the water level dropped, inch by inch, the secrets of the beach began to emerge from the murky depths, and what they saw first confirmed their wildest hopes. The entire surface of the beach within the cofferdam was not sand or stone, but was covered in a thick, fibrous, dark brown matting. It was the same material they had found 60 feet down in the money pit. It was coconut husk fiber. This discovery was a thunderclap of validation. It was the first definitive physical link between the money pit and this distant cove. The same hands, the same exotic materials, the same grand design were at work in both places. The builders had not just dug a hole, they had engineered a landscape. With a sense of reverence, the workers began to peel back this ancient, tropical blanket. Beneath the coconut fiber, they found another carefully constructed layer, a bed of smooth, rounded beach stones packed together to a depth of 5 feet. It was a massive filter, designed to let water pass through while trapping larger debris. And then, when they finally removed the last of the stones, the great secret of the flood trap was laid bare, revealed in a design of stunning and elegant simplicity. Beneath the filter stones they found not one, but 5 separate, box-like drains built from flat stones and running parallel to each other. They were arranged like the fingers of a giant. Open hands spread across the beach. Each finger drain started near the low -tide mark and sloped gently upward, converging toward the shore. They all fed into a single, larger main channel, a stone-line tunnel that aimed directly inland, straight toward the money pit. The genius of the system was breathtaking. It was a perfectly designed passive water collection machine. Seawater would wash over the beach. The top layer of coconut fiber would act like a giant sponge, allowing water through but filtering out the shifting sands of the cove, preventing the system from ever clogging. The water would then percolate down through the 5-foot layer of stones, being cleansed of any remaining silt or seaweed. Finally, the clean seawater would flow into the 5-finger drains, be channeled into the main artery, and then begin its 5-100-foot journey through the underground tunnel to fill the money pit, serving as the endless, patient guardian of whatever lay within. This was an engineering marvel that beggared belief. It was not the work of pirates, it was the work of masters. They had not simply dug a tunnel to the sea, they had built an artificial beach, a sophisticated filtration and delivery system on a scale that was almost unimaginable for a pre-industrial age. The men of the Truro Company stood in the drained, muddy basin of their cofferdam, gazing in silent awe at this ancient, exposed mechanism. They had found it. They had found the source of the water, the very heart of the trap. A wave of triumph must have washed over them. They had solved the engineering puzzle. All they had to do now was block this main channel, sever the pit's connection to the sea, and the treasure would be theirs. The water in the pit could finally be pumped dry, and they could descend to claim their prize. Victory felt not just possible, but inevitable. They had stared into the face of the island's greatest defense and had unmasked it. But the guardian of Oak Island, whether a curse, a spirit, or simply the raw, indifferent power of nature itself, had not yet played its final card. As the men planned their next move, the sky began to darken. A storm born far out in the Atlantic was bearing down on the coast. That night it hit with ferocious power. Gale minus force winds howled across the island, and monstrous waves, far greater than the gentle lapping of the daily tide, rose up and crashed against the shore. When the storm finally passed and the grey morning light broke, the men rushed back to Smith's Cove, their hearts filled with a dreadful anxiety. Their worst fears were realized. The product of so much labor and expense, the wall they had built to defy the ocean, was gone. It had been utterly obliterated by the storm, smashed into splinters and washed away. The sea had surged back in, once again covering the beach with water, sand, and silt, burying the magnificent finger drains as if they had never been seen. Nature, with a single, violent shrug, had effortlessly erased their greatest achievement. The secret was once again hidden, returned to the custody of the sea. This blow was fatal for the Truro Company. They had spent the last of their funds and their energy on the cofferdam. To rebuild it was impossible. Had touched the very solution to the mystery, only to have it snatched away at the last possible moment. Defeated and heartbroken, they had no choice but to abandon their quest. They left Oak Island with nothing but the memory of what they had seen, a fleeting, incredible glimpse of the island's true hidden face, the spectacular failure of the Truro Company, and their fleeting, incredible glimpse of the finger drains at Smith's Cove added a new and formidable chapter to the Oak Island legend. The mystery was no longer just a deep hole with wooden platforms, it was a sophisticated, large scale hydraulic engineering project, protected by the full might of the Atlantic Ocean. The sheer genius of it was daunting, and for more than a decade, the island was left to its quiet, watery vigil. But the world outside was changing at a breathtaking pace. The mid-19th century was the age of steam. It was a time of iron and fire, of immense power harnessed from boiling water. This new energy was driving locomotives across continents, powering factories that churned out goods at an unprecedented rate, and reshaping the very landscape of human endeavor. It was an era of supreme confidence in technology, a belief that no problem was too great to be solved by the application of modern industrial might. And eventually, this new power and this new confidence arrived on the shores of Oak Island. In 1861, a new syndicate was formed, calling itself the Oak Island Association. Like their predecessors, they were run by the irresistible pull of the legend, but they came armed with a weapon that they believed would finally tip the scales in their favor, a machine that seemed, to the people of that time, almost omnipotent. They brought a steam-powered water pump. Let us take a moment to imagine the arrival of this machine. It was not a simple tool to be carried ashore. It was a behemoth of cast iron and brass, a heavy, complex engine that had to be disassembled, transported to the island by barge, and then hauled laboriously by teams of horses and men up the hill to the site of the money pit. When it was finally assembled and its boiler was lit for the first time, the very soundscape of Oak Island was forever altered. For more than 60 years, the dominant sounds had been the wind in the trees, the cry of gulls, and the ceaseless rhythm of the waves. A new and alien symphony began. First came the sound of the firebox, the crackle and draw of wood or coal being consumed to heat the water in the massive boiler. A dedicated fireman would tend this fire, his job to feed the beast and keep its iron heart hot. Then, as the water heated and steam began to build, a low, resonant hum would fill the air, the sound of immense pressure gathering within the boiler's iron shell. The air itself would grow thick with the sharp industrial smells of coal smoke and hot machine oil. When the pressure reached its operational level and the operator pulled the valve, the true performance began. High-minus pressure steam, hissing sharply, would surge through pipes into the engine cylinders. The pistons would begin to move, driving the great flywheel and connecting rods in a powerful rhythmic dance. A deep, percussive clank-chuff would echo through the forest, the sound of the engine's iron lungs breathing. It was the sound of harnessed power, a steady, relentless heartbeat of industry set against the wild quiet of the island. The arrival of this steam pump represented a new philosophy of the hunt. The members of the Oak Island Association believed they possessed an overwhelming technological advantage. The water that had baffled the Truro Company, the water that rose and fell with the tides, would be no match for the tireless work of their machine. They saw this not as a contest of wits but as a contest of force. It was the power of the 19th century pitted against the ingenuity of a much earlier, unenlightened age, and in that contest, they had no doubt who would prevail. You can imagine their pride and excitement as the pump was first engaged. A thick hose was lowered into the dark water of the money pit. With a great shudder and a cloud of steam, the pump began its work. A thick, steady stream of murky, brown water, smelling of mud and stagnant secrets, began to gush from the outlet pipe, carving a new channel in the earth as it flowed away toward the sea. They were, for the first time, visibly and powerfully emptying the pit. They were challenging the ancient builders with a voice of thunderous steam and iron. But they soon discovered that they had underestimated the elegant power of their unseen adversary. The pump worked tirelessly, day and night, its rhythmic sea huffing a constant presence on the island. Yet, the water level in the money pit dropped with agonizing slowness. And if the pump was stopped for even a short time for maintenance or refueling, the water would quickly rise again, reclaiming its lost territory. They had found a terrible equilibrium. The unseen flood tunnels, fed by the infinite ocean, were pouring water into the pit almost as fast as their mighty steam pump could draw it out. The contest became a brutal war of attrition. The steam pump, a hungry beast, consumed vast quantities of fuel and fresh water, and the ocean, through its hidden arteries, silently, cooing on, effortlessly replenished the pit. Let us end our story for tonight in this moment of tense, noisy stalemate. On one side, you have the rhythmic, powerful roar of the steam engine, a testament to human ambition and the force of the industrial will. On the other, you have the silent, inexhaustible influx of the sea, a testament to the ancient, patient power of the island's defenses. These two forces, one loud and furious, the other quiet and relentless, were now locked in a great struggle over the pit. And this struggle, this confrontation between the new age and the old, was about to end in a way that no one could have foreseen, with a sudden violent tragedy that would add a new and darker chapter to the island's curse. The great steam pump of the Oak Island Association had become the new, noisy heart of the island. Its rhythmic, percussive breathing was a constant presence, a sound of relentless effort that echoed through the trees and out over the waters of Mahon Bay, day and night. It labored in its great stalemate with the sea, drawing up vast quantities of water from the money pit, only to have it replaced by the silent, inexhaustible flood tunnels. This was the battle of the new age against the old, a contest of industrial might against ancient ingenuity. And then, on a day like any other in 1861, the battle ended. It did not end with a victory or a surrender. It ended with a sudden, violent bang. The boiler of the great steam pump exploded. We need not dwell on the terrifying specifics of that moment, on the flash of fire or the shrapnel of hot metal. For a story meant for rest, the true impact is found not in the noise but in the silence that followed it. Imagine, for a moment, the constant soundscape of the island, the steady chuff minus chuff of the engine, the hiss of steam, the clank of moving parts. It was a sound that had become so familiar to the men working there that it had faded into the background of their lives, a constant industrial hum. In an instant it was gone. The rhythmic heartbeat stopped. In its place, a profound and unnerving quiet descended upon the clearing. The old sounds of the island, which had been drowned out for months, rushed back in to fill the void. The gentle sigh of the wind through the pines, the distant cry of a gull, the soft lapping of waves on the shore. To the men on the island, this sudden return to natural silence was more jarring than any explosion. It was the sound of catastrophic failure. In the chaos of that moment, a terrible price was paid. A man, one of the workers tending the engine, was killed. This was the first life claimed by the Oak Island treasure hunt. For more than 60 years, the quest had cost fortunes. It had consumed time, energy, and hope. It had been a story of frustration and disappointment, of near-miss misses and tantalizing clues. But until this moment, the cost had been measured in currency and effort. Now, for the first time, it was measured in blood. This single, tragic death fundamentally changed the character of the mystery. It draped a dark, somber veil over what had once been a romantic adventure, and it gave a chilling new substance to a local legend, a whisper that had long haunted the shores of Mahon Bay. It was the whisper of a curse. The legend was simple and terrible. It said that 7 men must die before the treasure of Oak Island could be found. Before 1861, this was likely just a piece of folklore, a spooky tale told to frighten children away from the abandoned pits. No different from stories of pirate ghosts or sea monsters, it was a superstition easily dismissed by practical men of industry and investment. But now, the curse had a name. An unnamed boiler operator became the first of the 7. The death of this man transformed the quest. It was no longer just a puzzle of engineering and history. It now carried the weight of a tragedy. The searchers, it seemed, were not just battling water and earth, they were contending with something more dangerous, more malevolent. Whether one believed in a supernatural curse or simply acknowledged the real minus world dangers of such a hazardous undertaking, the island suddenly felt far more menacing. The Oak Island Association was shattered by the blow. They had lost their most vital piece of equipment, the very symbol of their technological confidence. They had lost a fellow worker, and their finances were crippled. After a few more half-hearted and futile attempts to manage the endless water, they, like all the companies before them, finally gave up. The money pit was abandoned once more. The ruined steam pump, a twisted hulk of rusted iron, lay silent beside the flooded shaft. It had arrived as a symbol of conquest, a promise that modern power could overcome any ancient obstacle. It now remained as a grim monument to failure, and to the first life lost in the pursuit of the island's secret. Let us rest for a moment in that heavy quiet. Imagine the island after the noise of industry has faded. The wind whistles through the broken, rusted metal of the dead engine. The water in the pit lies still and dark, a silent witness that has now consumed not just money and hope, but a human life, one of 7. The thought, like a cold seed, was now planted in the mind of every person who would ever hear the story. It added a dark, fatalistic gravity to the legend, a sense of a pre-minus written tragedy unfolding. Was the curse real? And if so, who would be next? These questions would now be forever intertwined with the mystery of the treasure itself. After the first tragedy, the first life lost, the story of Oak Island grew darker and more complex. The simple quest for riches was now shadowed by the weight of a curse. For several years, the island was left to its quiet grief, but the legend, now richer and more compelling than ever, continued to circulate. Tonight, let us take a gentle step back from the timeline of the dig itself. Let us drift away from the mud and the water and the relentless machinery, and spend a few nights floating in the quiet, imaginative space of the great theories. These are the grand stories that people have told themselves to try and make sense of the immense labor and baffling ingenuity buried in the island soil. Each theory is like a different moon, casting its own unique light on the mystery. We will begin with the oldest, the most romantic, and the most enduring of all the theories, that the money pit was built to hide pirate treasure. This idea has been at the very heart of the story since 1795. From the moment Daniel McGinnis first laid eyes on the Son Minus off Oakland with its stackle block, the coast of Nova Scotia was a pirate's haven. Its countless hidden coves, its dense forests, and its sparse population made it the perfect place to careen a ship, take on fresh water, and of course to bury treasure. The names of infamous pirates like Edward Blackbeard Teach and Captain William Kidd were whispered in taverns and told as bedtime stories. Their lives were a thrilling tapestry of adventure, violence, and unimaginable wealth, and they were the superstars of their time. So when a deep, deliberately constructed pit was discovered, the first and most natural conclusion was that it was the work of pirates. The name most often and most persistently linked to Oak Island is that of Captain William Kidd. The legend tells that before his capture in Boston in 1699, Kidd, his ship laden with treasure from his voyages in the East, sailed north for a time. It is believed he had both the opportunity and the motive to create a secure hiding place for his fortune on an island like this one. There is even a persistent story, first recorded in the 1860 seconds, of a dying member of Kidd's former crew confessing that they had buried treasure worth £2 million on the island, that number echoing down through the years, aligns perfectly with the later, famous translation of the 90-foot stone. This theory is steeped in romance. You can almost see it. A ship with a black flag flying from its mast, slipping silently into Mahon Bay under the cover of darkness. Rough miners-looking sailors, their faces illuminated by torchlight, haul heavy chests filled with Spanish gold and jewels ashore. Then, under the stern eye of their captain, they begin the long, arduous work of digging, their efforts fueled by promises of wealth and drum. And yet, when we look at this theory with a more measured gaze, some difficult questions arise. Pirates, by their very nature, were practical and efficient men. When they buried treasure, their primary goal was to be able to retrieve it again quickly and easily. They would choose a simple, memorable spot, dig a hole a few feet deep, drop in the chest, make a secret mark, and sail away. The Oak Island money pit is the absolute opposite of this. Absurdly deep and represents a colossal expenditure of time and labor. Why would a pirate captain whose life was one of constant movement and risk spend months or even years compelling his entire crew to construct a vault so elaborate that even he would find it nearly impossible to reopen? It seems to run contrary to the entire pirate ethos. The engineering is too patient, too sophisticated, too permanent. To resolve this contradiction, some have proposed a fascinating variation on the theory. What if the money pit was not the private stash of a single pirate, but a communal pirate bank? Imagine this. At the height of the golden age of piracy, a consortium of the most successful captains, men like Henry Morgan or Bartholomew Sharp, realize they need a truly secure place to deposit their wealth. They pool their resources, their manpower, and their engineering knowledge to construct the ultimate, impregnable vault. The complexity of the pit, in this version, becomes its greatest feature. Perhaps it was designed so that no single captain could open it alone. Maybe it required multiple keys or a series of shared secrets to disarm the traps and access the treasure. This would prevent any one member from betraying the others and making off with the entire hoard. This pirate bank theory accounts for the scale of the engineering, but it still faces a fundamental challenge: the pirate character. These were men famous for their fierce independence, their opportunism, and their frequent betrayals. Is it truly plausible that such a group could cooperate on a long-term, project of this magnitude? It seems to strain against their very nature. And so the pirate theory remains like a beautiful hazy moon. It casts the first and most romantic light on the Oak Island story, the light that guided the first discoveries. But when you look closer, its glow seems unable to fully illuminate the deepest and most complex corners of the mystery. Tonight, you can let your mind drift in this world of gold doubloons, Jolly Rogers, and swashbuckling adventure. There is no need to resolve its inconsistencies. Simply enjoy the story for what it is: the classic, foundational myth of this great quest, filled with the pure, adventurous spirit of the Age of Sail. It may not be the final answer, but it is, without a doubt, the perfect beginning. If the theory of pirate gold is the most romantic story told about Oak Island, then tonight, we will explore the one that is the most epic, the most mysterious, and the one that best seems to fit the baffling scale of the engineering. It is a theory that asks us to turn the clock back much further, past the Age of Sail and into the medieval world of crusades, castles, and ancient knightly orders. Tonight, we speak of the Knights Templar. The Templars were, for a time, one of the most powerful and wealthy organizations in the Western world. Founded in the early 12th century, their official mission was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But they quickly evolved into much more. They were elite warriors, but they were also brilliant innovators, creating an early form of international banking that made them fabulously wealthy. They owned vast tracts of land, commanded fleets of ships, and built some of the most formidable castles and fortifications across Europe and the Middle East. And legend whispers that they were guardians not only of immense material wealth, but of something far more precious. It is said they were the protectors of the most sacred relics in Christendom, perhaps the Holy Grail itself, or even the Ark of the Covenant, the chest said to hold the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. But on Friday, October 13th, in the year 1307, their fortunes turned. King Philip IV, France, who was deeply in their debt, ordered the arrest of all Templars within his kingdom and the seizure of their assets. It was a stunning betrayal, a coordinated strike designed to shatter the order. But the legend insists that the Templars were not caught entirely unaware. It is said that before the king's soldiers could strike, the great Templar fleet, laden with the bulk of the order's immense treasury and its most sacred relics, slipped away from its port at La Rochelle and vanished into the mists of the Atlantic. Where did it go? History has no certain answer, and it is in that silence that the Oak Island Templar theory is born. This theory proposes that a contingent of the fleeing Templars, guided by secret knowledge and perhaps even pre-minus existing maps, sailed west across the ocean. They were not just escaping, they were seeking a new, hidden sanctuary, a place far from the grasp of European kings and popes where they could safeguard their treasures and their secrets until the world was ready for them once more. And the remote, defensible coast of Nova Scotia, a land they may have known about through Norse or other early explorers, became their destination. This theory is so compelling because it offers a plausible answer to the most difficult questions posed by the money pit. First, there is the question of motive. If what is buried on Oak Island is not just gold, but a sacred object like the Holy Grail, an artifact central to the very foundations of Western faith, then the immense effort and complexity of the pit suddenly makes perfect sense. This was not just about hiding wealth, it was about creating a permanent, impregnable vault for an object of infinite value. It was about protecting a holy secret. Second, there is the question of resources. The Knights Templar were, at their height, arguably the wealthiest multinational corporation of their day. Funding a project of this scale, transporting materials and mobilizing a large, disciplined workforce would have been well within their capabilities. And finally, and most importantly, there is the question of technology. The Templars were not just bankers and monks, they were master military engineers. They were the great castle miners builders of the Crusades. Their knowledge of fortifications, stonework, geometry, and hydraulics was second to none. The construction of a deep, Booby mine a strut shaft with sophisticated flood tunnels would have been a complex, but entirely achievable feat for the same minds that built impenetrable fortresses in the deserts of the Holy Land. This theory is not built on pure speculation. A number of clues, both on Oak Island and in the surrounding region, seem to point in this direction. In the nearby community of New Ross, for example, there are stone ruins built in a style that some researchers have linked to Templar constructions in Europe. There are also the legends of Prince Henry Sinclair of Scotland, a nobleman with strong family ties to the Templars who is said to have led a fleet to Nova Scotia in 1398, nearly a century before Columbus. But the most direct and compelling evidence has come from the island itself in modern times. We will speak more of these discoveries in later stories, but one in particular stands out: a small, simple cross made of lead. Scientific analysis of this cross has traced its lead content to a mine in southern France and dated its creation to the 13th or 14th century, the very time and place where the Knights Templar were most active. Tonight, you can let your imagination drift with that phantom fleet, sailing west across a vast and unknown ocean. Picture the ships, their sails perhaps bearing the famous Red Cross of the Order, making landfall on the quiet shores of Oak Island. These men were not pirates coming to bury plunder, they were guardians, coming to build a sanctuary. They carried a heavy burden, a sacred trust, and with their skill and their faith, they constructed a new kind of temple for their secret, one made not of stone and mortar, but of earth and water, a vault designed to last for eternity. This theory elevates the Oak Island mystery from a treasure hunt to an epic quest, a story of faith, persecution, and the preservation of a sacred history. It transforms the money pit from a simple hole in the ground into a potential holy of holies. It is, of course, still just a theory, a grand and beautiful one, but a theory nonetheless, waiting for its final proof to emerge from the dark, quiet earth. Tonight, let us drift away from the grand, centuries-minus spanning epics of knights and pirates and turn our attention to a theory that is more intimate, more specific, and rooted in a single tragic moment of history. This story does not involve ancient orders or global conspiracies, but focuses on the desperate act of one woman trying to save the last vestiges of a dying world. Our journey takes us to France in the late 18th century, a nation convulsed by the fires of revolution. The old order of kings and aristocrats was crumbling, and at its very center was a figure of both immense privilege and profound tragedy, Queen Marie Antoinette. The legend, as it connects to Oak Island, begins in June of 1791. The French Revolution is reaching a fever pitch. King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, now virtual prisoners in Paris, can feel the danger closing in around them. They plan a secret and desperate escape, but before they flee, the Queen, known for her love of magnificent jewelry, gathers her most precious gems, along with a significant portion of the French crown jewels. These are not just personal adornments, they are the portable, concentrated wealth of a monarchy on the verge of collapse. She entrusts this priceless collection to her most loyal and trusted lady in waiting. As history tells us, the royal family's escape ended in failure. They were captured in the town of Varennes and dragged back to Paris, where they would eventually meet their fate at the guillotine. But the lady in waiting, the faithful guardian of the jewels, managed to slip through the net. This is where the theory takes a bold leap across the Atlantic. Began a perilous journey. She somehow made her way to a port, boarded a ship bound for North America, and after a long and dangerous voyage, arrived at a logical destination for a French loyalist, the fortress of Louisbourg and Cape Breton Island, in what is now Nova Scotia. At that time, Louisbourg was a major French military and commercial stronghold in the New World. It would have been a natural sanctuary for someone fleeing the chaos in France, but even here, the jewels were not truly safe. North America was also a theater of conflict, with Britain and France vying for control. The lady in waiting would have known that she needed a more permanent, more secret, and more secure hiding place for her queen's legacy. And so her eyes turned to the nearby coast, to the sheltered waters of Mahon Bay with its hundreds of secluded islands. Oak Island, remote and densely wooded, would have been the perfect choice. What makes this theory so compelling is its timeline. It fits into the known history of Oak Island with remarkable precision. The royal family's flight from Paris was in 1791. The discovery of the money pit by Daniel McGinnis and his friends was in 1795. This leaves a from-year window. It is a tight schedule, certainly, for constructing something as complex as the money pit, but perhaps not an impossible one, especially for a group with military engineering knowledge. This theory provides a powerful and poignant motive for the pit's construction. It was not built to hide stolen loot, but to protect the last glittering remnants of a deposed dynasty. You can imagine the scene: the Lady Minus in Minus waiting, arriving at Louisbourg, uses her royal authority to secretly commission a small, loyal team of French military engineers or soldiers. Bound by their oath to the crown, they travel with her to Oak Island. Their work would have been driven by a sense of desperate urgency and profound duty. They may not have had the centuries of accumulated wealth of the Templars, but they would have possessed the practical engineering skills of the French army. They would have worked feverishly to create a vault worthy of its sacred contents. This theory also offers a possible explanation for the pit's almost excessive complexity. Why build such an elaborate trap just to hide jewels? Perhaps because these were not just any jewels. They were a symbol of a divinely ordained monarchy that had been violently overthrown. The construction of the pit, in this light, becomes a kind of ritual act, an engineering monument built to express their devotion and to mourn the passing of their world. The elaborate defenses were a testament to the immense value, both material and symbolic, of what they were protecting. This theory even found a powerful supporter in a future American president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who in his youth was part of a treasure miners hunting syndicate on Oak Island, remained a lifelong believer in the mystery. He was firmly convinced that the money pit held the lost jewels of the French crown. Tonight, you can let your thoughts follow this brave and loyal Lady Minus in Minus waiting. Imagine her standing on the shore of Oak Island, the weight of her mission pressing down on her. Behind her lies the blood and terror of the revolution, before her, a wild and unknown continent. Dark pit she oversees is more than just a vault. It is a tomb for a lost era, a final, secret resting place for the glory of a tragic queen. This theory gives the cold, damp earth of the money-pitted, distinctly human warmth. It ceases to be a mere engineering puzzle and becomes a story of loyalty, duty, and loss. Like all the other theories, it remains a beautiful and unproven possibility. But it offers us a new and deeply moving lens through which to gaze into that dark, mysterious hole in the ground. In the quiet nights we have spent together, we have explored the grand theories of what might lie at the bottom of the money pit. We have imagined pirate gold, glittering in the darkness. We have considered the sacred relics of the Knights Templar, and the lost, tragic jewels of a French queen. These are all treasures in the way we have always understood the word, objects of immense material value. But tonight, let us consider a possibility that redefines the very meaning of treasure. Let us entertain a theory that suggests the pit was not built to protect something that would make a person rich, but something that would make the whole world wiser. This theory proposes that the great secret of Oak Island is not gold or jewels or holy relics. It is words, it is ideas. It is a literary secret so profound that it could shake the foundations of Western culture. Our story takes us back to the England of the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the vibrant, dangerous, and intellectually fertile age of Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. At the center of this theory are two of the most monumental figures of that era. One is William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford-upon-Avon, celebrated as the greatest playwright who ever lived. The other is Sir Francis Bacon, a brilliant philosopher, a pioneering scientist, a powerful statesman, and a man with a deep and abiding fascination with codes, ciphers, and secret societies. This is the Baconian theory, and its central claim is as audacious as it is intriguing that the true author of the plays and poems attributed to William Shakespeare was, in fact, Sir Francis Bacon. Proponents of this theory, who call themselves Baconianists, argue that in the rigid social hierarchy of Elizabethan England, it would have been unthinkable for a high-born nobleman and courtier like Bacon to be publicly associated with the craft of playwriting, a profession considered common and even vulgar at the time. To protect his reputation, they argue, Bacon needed a frontman, an actor from within the theatre world who could serve as the public face for his literary creations. And the man he chose, they believe, was William Shakespeare of Stratford. This idea, which has long existed on the fringes of academic debate, finds a strange and compelling resonance with the mysteries of Oak Island. First, there is the matter of Bacon's character. He was a master of secrets, a man obsessed with hidden knowledge. He invented the famous Baconian cipher, a method of concealing messages within a printed text by using two different typefaces. The idea of creating a complex coded message on a stone slab, like the one found at 90 feet, feels perfectly in keeping with Bacon's intellectual style. Second, the theory addresses the great literature of the missing manuscripts. To this day, not a single original handwritten manuscript of any of Shakespeare's plays has ever been found. The Baconian theory suggests that Bacon, knowing the explosive nature of his secret authorship and perhaps other court secrets hidden within the plays, would have gone to extraordinary lengths to preserve his original papers for posterity. He would have needed to create the ultimate archive, a vault so secure and so remote that it could protect his legacy for centuries. Far across the Atlantic would have been the perfect location. This theory provides a powerful motive for the pit's almost fanatical complexity. If you are hiding gold, you build a strong corpse, but if you are hiding a truth that could rewrite history, you build a fortress of the mind, a puzzle that can only be solved by those with the wit and will to understand it. The money pit in this light is not a bank vault, it is a library vault, and there are more specific, tantalizing clues. Early searchers on the island reported finding flasks containing traces of mercury. In his scientific pursuits, Bacon is known to have experimented with the use of mercury as a preservative for documents, believing it would protect fragile paper from decay and the ravages of insects. Furthermore, there is the figure of Thomas Bushell, Bacon's trusted servant and protege. Bushell was a brilliant mining engineer, renowned for his skill in draining and reclaiming flood mines in Britain. The advanced knowledge of hydraulics needed to design and build the sophisticated flood tunnels on Oak Island would have been well within his technical expertise. Tonight, you can let your imagination drift into this new and fascinating dimension. The treasure at the bottom of the pit may not be something you can spend, but something you can read. Deep in that water-filled vault, a lead-lined chest, carefully sealed and preserved with mercury. Not coins or gems, but stacks of yellowed parchment, covered in the elegant script of the English Renaissance. Here are the original manuscripts of Hamlet, King Lear, and The Tempest, and hidden within their lines in a cipher of Bacon's own design is the story of his life, his secrets, and the truth of his authorship. This theory gives the Oak Island mystery an intellectual and philosophical grace. It transforms the hunt from a grubby search for wealth into a noble quest for truth. It reminds us that the most valuable things are not always those that glitter. Sometimes the greatest treasure is a story, waiting patiently in the darkness to be told. After the great industrial efforts of the 19th century faded into silence and rust, Oak Island once again fell into a long and quiet slumber. Decades passed. The world outside was transformed by 2 world wars and the dawn of the atomic age, but on the island, time seemed to stand still. The money pit remained a flooded, enigmatic pool, its secrets guarded by the patient tides. The stories of old treasure companies became footnotes in dusty books, and the island was largely forgotten by the wider world. And then, in 1959, a single magazine article, like a stone tossed into a still pond, sent ripples out across the continent. An issue of Reader's Digest published a compelling account of the Oak Island mystery, recounting its strange history, the repeating platforms, the flood tunnels, and the tantalizing clues. In the city of Hamilton, Ontario, a man named Robert Rest-All read that article, and it ignited a dormant fire within him. Robert Rest-All was not an ordinary man. In a previous life, he and his wife, Mildred, had been professional daredevils. They were motorcycle stunt riders, the stars of a thrilling attraction called the Globe of Death. You can picture it, a giant, spherical cage of steel, inside which they would ride their motorcycles at high speeds, defying gravity, their paths weaving in a breathtaking, dangerous ballet. It was a life that required immense courage, unwavering trust, and a spirit that thrived on the edge of possibility. But by 1959, those days were long behind him. At 50-6 years old, Rest-All was a successful plumbing contractor, a family man living a comfortable, stable middle-class life. The roar of the motorcycle had been replaced by the quiet hum of suburban routine. The story of Oak Island, however, spoke to the part of him that had never truly left that steel globe. The sheer audacity of the mystery, the grandness of the challenge, it captivated him completely. He began to research, devouring every piece of information he could find about the island. He became convinced that with his practical engineering skills and his unyielding determination, he could succeed where all others had failed. And so in the autumn of that year, Robert Rest-All made a decision that would alter the course of his family's life forever. He quit his well-paying job. He sold their comfortable house in Hamilton. He invested their life savings into second-hand digging equipment, including an air compressor and a drill. Then, with his wife Mildred, their 20-1-year-old son Robert Jr., known to everyone as Bobby, and their 11-year-old son, Ricky, he moved his entire family to that remote, lonely island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The arrival of the Rest-Alls marks a new and profoundly human chapter in the Oak Island saga. They were not a faceless syndicate of anonymous investors. They were not a company with a board of directors. They were a family. Their quest was not a commercial venture, it was a shared family adventure, the ultimate expression of their unique and daring spirit. Imagine their arrival on the island. They floated their car and their heavy equipment across the water on a makeshift raft. Near the site of the money pit, among the weathered remnants of past failures, they built their new home. A tiny 16- by -16- foot shack made of rough lumber and tar paper. Too many, The decision must have seemed like madness, to abandon a life of security and comfort for a two-year-old treasure hunt that had yielded nothing but frustration. But for the Roosevels, a family forged in the high-stakes world of daredevil performance, this was perhaps the most logical next step. The ultimate globe of death with the highest stakes of all. They became the sole residents of Oak Island, the modern-day keepers of its mystery. Their unique story quickly attracted the attention of the press. Newspapers and magazines began to write about the treasure-hunting family, and the Roosevels became the first searchers to live their quest in the public eye, their lives chronicled for a fascinated world. Tonight, let us watch as this family settles into their new, strange life. There is Robert, the father, his eyes alight with a powerful dream. There is Mildred, the steadfast wife and mother, her quiet strength the anchor of their adventure. And there are the two boys, Bobby and Ricky, about to spend their formative years on an island steeped in legend and whispered curses. Their story will be one of hardship, of hope, of small, tantalizing triumphs, and ultimately of a tragedy so profound it would forever be etched into the island's dark history. But here, at the beginning of their journey, the air is filled with a rugged optimism. They believe with all their hearts that they will be the ones to finally solve the puzzle. They have bet everything they have on that belief. And Oak Island, with its quiet woods and its deep, watery secrets, has opened its arms to receive them. The Roosevelt family settled into their new life on Oak Island, a life stripped bare of modern convenience and defined by the raw elements of the Nova Scotian coast. 16-foot square cabin, hastily built from rough, unfinished boards and tar paper to ward off the wind and rain. It was a space of profound simplicity, a world away from the comfortable suburban house they had left behind in Ontario. Inside the cabin, there was no electricity to banish the darkness. Their only light came from the soft, gold and flicker of kerosene lamps which cast long dancing shadows on the wooden walls, turning the small space into an intimate self-contained world. There was no running water. Every drop they used for drinking, cooking and washing had to be hauled by hand. Their well was a strange and unconventional one, a large crater, 50 feet across, left by a dynamite explosion from some long-minus forgotten treasure hunter. Here, rainwater and melted snow would collect, and the Roosevels would carry it in pails back to their cabin, a distance of some 300 feet. The winters were the hardest. Exposed to the full force of the North Atlantic, would be gripped by a deep and penetrating cold with temperatures often plunging far below freezing. Their only defense against the chill was a small, wood-burning iron stove. Keeping it fed was a constant, demanding chore. Robert and his son Bobby would have to venture into the frozen woods to felled trees and haul the wood back, their breath misting in the frigid air. The steady work of splitting and stacking logs was as essential to their survival as the search for treasure itself. For Mildred, all life on the island was a unique challenge. For years, she was the only woman living there, a solitary female presence in a world of wind, woods, and masculine obsession. She was the anchor of the family, creating a home amidst the most primitive of conditions. She cooked their meals on the simple stove, washed their clothes by hand, and in the quiet hours she became a teacher, guiding her youngest son, Ricky, through his school lessons by correspondence course. But this was a family forged in a world of shared risk and adventure, and they possessed a remarkable resilience. Their past life in the globe of death had perhaps prepared them for this, for living on the edge, for relying completely on one another, for finding joy in a life stripped down to its essentials. Their days revolved around a single, unwavering purpose: the dig. Every morning, Robert and Bobby would head out to the money pit area to continue their slow and arduous work, not with the grand force of the steam-powered companies before them, but with a patient, methodical persistence. Their goal was the same one that had obsessed searchers for centuries: to locate the hidden flood tunnels and find a way to block them, to finally staunch the wound that allowed the sea to bleed into the pit. They sank new shafts, drilled new boreholes, and sifted through the mud and clay, always searching, always hoping. Mildred and Ricky were not just bystanders, they were part of the team. They would help where they could, clearing brush, sorting materials, and providing the steady support that kept the entire enterprise going. The family operated as a single, cohesive unit, bound together by a shared dream. And despite the hardships, their life was not without its moments of simple beauty and profound peace. In the summer, the island would come alive. They would pick wild berries in the woods and fish for their supper in the clear waters of the bay. The island was their backyard, their pantry, and their playground. In the evenings, after a long day of labor, they would gather in the small, warm cabin. They would often play a game, a ritual of hope that became their most cherished pastime. "Let's spend the money," one of them would say, and they would begin to dream aloud, planning how they would use the immense fortune they were so sure they would find. They spoke of buying a grand yacht and sailing around the world, of visiting all the places they had only read about in books. These conversations, filled with laughter and imagination, were their true treasure, a bulwark against the cold and the loneliness. They developed a deep and intimate relationship with the island itself. They learned to read the sky and the wind, to know the turning of the seasons in their bones. They knew the island's paths, its trees, its moods. In her diary, Mildred noted a strange and poignant event. When they first arrived, there were still a few of the ancient, majestic red oaks for which the island was named. But during their years there, the last of these old trees finally died. For the raced ols, this was a moment of quiet celebration, for it was said, in the old legends of the island, that when the last oak fell, the treasure would finally be revealed. Tonight, let us rest here in the simple, rugged life of this remarkable family. Picture them in their small cabin, the world outside dark and cold, the only light coming from a single lamp, their faces animated as they dream of a future filled with impossible reaches, but also of immense hope, a testament to the power of a family united in a singular, extraordinary quest. The years on Oak Island began to blend into one another for the rest all family, each season marked by its own particular hardships and small, quiet victories. Their life was a slow, grinding battle against the island's stubborn secrets, a far cry from the grand, well-financed assaults of the 19th-century treasure companies. They did not have steam pumps or large crews, they had only their own for hands, their second-hand equipment, and an unshakable, almost spiritual belief in the treasure. Their work was not one of dramatic breakthroughs, but of painstaking, incremental progress. Robert Trest-All, with his practical knowledge of pipes and drainage, spent much of his time not attacking the money pit directly, but trying to understand the island's complex hydrology. He sank dozens of small test shafts, trying to map the network of flood tunnels that had defeated all his predecessors. It was a lonely and often frustrating task, a game of geological chess against an invisible opponent. But in the midst of this slow and often discouraging work, the island would sometimes offer up a small token, a tiny clue that was enough to rekindle their hope and fuel their determination for months to come. One day, while exploring the shoreline at Smith's Cove, the same area where the Truro Company had made its spectacular discovery of the finger drains a century before, Robert found something that made his heart leap. It was a simple weathered rock, but etched into its surface, he believed he could clearly make out a date, the year 1704. Let us pause to consider the power of such a find. To a man who had staked his entire life on this quest, this was not just a rock, it was a message. It was a tangible link to the past, a piece of evidence suggesting that people were here, engaged in some significant work long before the money pit was officially discovered in 1795. The date 1704 fits perfectly into the timeline of the great pirates like Captain Kidd. For Robert, this stone was a confirmation, a whisper from the builders themselves, telling him he was in the right place, that his sacrifices were not in vain. He held it in his hands as if it were a piece of the treasure itself. Life on the island also brought unexpected challenges that had little to do with digging. As word of the treasure miners hunting family spread, a steady stream of curious tourists and amateur theorists would make their way to the island, especially in the summer months. Their own maps and endless questions, answering the same questions day after day about the layout of the island and the location of the various pits and landmarks, became a time-consuming chore for the family. It was young Bobby Rest-All who came up with an ingenious solution. With a practical mind that mirrored his father's, he sat down and carefully drew a detailed map of Oak Island, marking all the key locations: the money pit, Smith's Cove, the various searcher shafts. He then began selling copies of his hand-drawn map to visitors for $1 apiece. This small act speaks volumes about their life. It shows their resourcefulness, their direct and personal connection to the legend they were now a part of, and the quiet, constant pressure they were under to find ways to fund their quest. That financial pressure was a constant, gnawing presence. The dream of finding millions was always shadowed by the reality of needing to afford fuel for the pump, food for the table, and parts for the aging equipment. Robert Trest-All, a man of immense pride, found himself in the difficult position of having to sell tiny fractions of his stake in the potential treasure to keep the search alive. He would write to friends and potential investors, offering them a sliver of the future fortune in exchange for the modest funds needed to continue for another month, another season. A constant reminder of how precarious their situation was, sustained only by his unwavering conviction in the generosity of a few believers. And so their life continued, a tapestry woven from threads of hardship and hope. They were sustained not by grand discoveries but by these small, intensely personal clues, a stone with a date. The satisfaction of a day's hard work, the shared dream of a future that was always just beyond the next cheval of earth. They were no longer just searching for the treasure, they had become part of the island's living history, their own story now intertwined with the great mystery. Tonight, let us rest in the quiet perseverance of this family. They are not on the verge of a great breakthrough, they are simply enduring, holding on, their spirits buoyed by the smallest of signs. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are not measured in gold or jewels but in the quiet, daily acts of faith and the unwavering belief in a dream, even when the world sees only a muddy hole in the ground. For 6 long years the Rest-All family had lived in a state of patient, hopeful struggle. Their life on Oak Island was a quiet rhythm of hard work, small discoveries, and the enduring dream of what lay beneath their feet. By the summer of 1965, Robert Rest-All, now 60 years old, felt he was closer than ever to solving the island's greatest puzzle. He had spent years studying the island's strange hydrology, and he believed he had finally located one of the crucial flood tunnels near Smith's Cove. His plan was to sink a new, relatively shallow shaft, just 20-7 feet deep, to intercept and block this tunnel. If he could do that, he could finally begin the work of draining the money pit itself. August 17, 1965, began like any other summer day on the island, filled with the scent of pine and salt, and the sound of the bay lapping gently against the shore. Robert was working in the new shaft, a simple, unmined timbered pit dug into the damp earth. He was down at the bottom, perhaps clearing mud or examining the soil, when he was suddenly overcome. What happened next was not a dramatic collapse or a violent explosion. It was silent, invisible, and swift. A pocket of poisonous gas, perhaps hydrogen sulfide or carbon monoxide, seeping from the swampy, decaying earth had collected in the bottom of the pit. It was a colorless, odorless thief that stole the air from his lungs. Robert Rest-All slumped forward unconscious, and fell into the murky water that had collected at the bottom of the shaft. His son Bobby, who was working nearby, saw his father fall. Without a moment's hesitation, driven by the pure, primal instinct to save his father, the 20-year-old scrambled down the ladder into the pit. He reached the bottom, waded into the water, and was himself immediately overcome by the same deadly fumes. He collapsed beside his father. On the surface, the scene had turned from a routine workday into a desperate emergency. To other men who were part of the small work crew, Carl Grazer and Cyril Hills, saw what had happened. They shouted down into the pit, their calls met only with a terrible silence. They too acted on instinct, their only thought to rescue the 2 men now lying motionless in the water below. They descended into the shaft, one after the other, and one by one, they were consumed by the same invisible poison, slumping into the dark water. In the space of just a few minutes, a quiet summer afternoon had turned into a scene of unimaginable horror, for men now lay at the bottom of the shallow pit, lost to a silent, unseen killer. A visitor to the island, a man named Edward White, had been watching the work from a distance. He ran to the scene, taking in the horrific tableau. Another worker, Andy Dumont, arrived at the pit's edge. White, realizing the deadly nature of the air in the shaft, tied a rope around his waist and had Dumont lower him down. He held his breath, his mind racing. He managed to get a rope around the unconscious Andy Dumont, who had been the last to enter, and signaled to be pulled up. Dumont was brought to the surface, barely alive, the only one of the rescuers to survive. But it was too late for the others. Robert Rest-All, his son Bobby, Carl Grazer, and Cyril Hills were gone. The tragedy was absolute and devastating. It was not a slow decline into despair, but a sudden brutal reaping. The dream that had sustained the Rest-All family for 6 years, the dream of adventure and discovery, had ended in a muddy, gas-filled hole in the ground. Mildred Rest-All, who had been in their small cabin, heard the commotion and rushed to the scene, only to be met with a sight that would shatter her world. Her husband and her eldest son, the 2 pillars of her life, were lost. The news of the tragedy sent a shockwave far beyond the shores of the small island. The story of the treasure-hunting family had been one of hope and plucky determination. It was a story of profound and heartbreaking loss, and in the quiet, grief-stricken aftermath, the old whispers of the island began to rise again, this time with a chilling and undeniable force. The curse which had claimed its first victim a century before had now returned with a terrible vengeance. Before that August day, the tally stood at 1. Now, in a single, horrific event, for more names were added to the list. Robert Rest-All, Robert Bobby Rest-All Jr., Carl Grazer, Cyril Hills. The count had jumped from 1 to 5. The prophecy that 7 must die before the treasure could be found no longer felt like a piece of quaint folklore. It felt like an active, malevolent force, a ledger that was slowly but surely being filled. The island had claimed not just the family's fortune and their years of labor, but the family itself. Tonight, let us not think of treasure or of engineering. let us simply rest in the quiet, somber memory of this day. Let us acknowledge the immense human cost of this enduring mystery. The silence that fell over Oak Island on that August evening was a heavy one, filled with a grief that would forever change the story of the hunt, transforming it from a grand adventure into a solemn, and perhaps sacred quest. The sudden, silent violence of that August afternoon in 1965 left a wound on Oak Island deeper than any shaft ever dug. The tragedy that claimed the lives of Robert Restall, his son Bobby, and there to help us, Carl Grazer and Cyril Hiltz, brought the family a 6-year quest to a devastating and absolute end. The air, once filled with the sounds of their hopeful work, the chug of the pump, the scrape of shovels, the easy laughter of a family united in a dream, was now heavy with a profound and sorrowful silence. In the days that followed, a quiet procession of boats came to the island, not to deliver equipment to curious tourists, but to carry away the men who had been lost. The small cabin, which had been a home filled with warmth and plans for the future, became a house of mourning. For Mildred and her young son Ricky, the world had been irrevocably broken. They had lost a husband and a father, a son and a brother. They had lost their past and their future in a single, breathless moment. There is a particularly heartbreaking detail to this story, a private grief that Mildred Restall would carry with her for the rest of her life. Sometime before the accident, her son Bobby, weary of the endless, fruitless labor, had decided to leave the island. He had packed his things, ready to start a new life elsewhere. But Mildred, wanting to keep her family together, had gone after him and persuaded him to return. In the depths of her grief, this act of love became a source of unbearable guilt, a feeling that she was somehow responsible for her son's fate. They could not stay. The island, which had been their adventurous home, was now a place of unbearable memory. They packed their few belongings, leaving behind the simple cabin, the rusting equipment, and the ghosts of their loved ones. As they departed Oak Island for the last time, they left not just a failed treasure hunt, but the shattered pieces of their family. And as the story of the tragedy spread, the old whispers about the island began to rise again, no longer as folklore, but as a chilling prophecy seemingly fulfilled. The legend, 7 men must die before the treasure can be found, had claimed its first victim a century earlier with the explosion of a steam boiler. Now, in one horrific afternoon, the tally had leapt from 1 to 5. The curse was no longer a quaint, spooky tale. It now had a weight, a substance, a terrible credibility. It cast a long, dark shadow over the entire mystery, transforming it from a grand adventure into a somber and perhaps malevolent saga. The island was no longer just a puzzle to be solved, it was a place that demanded a price, a place that seemed to actively resist and punish those who came too close to its secrets. One might think that such a profound tragedy would have ended the search for good, that the island would have been declared too dangerous, too cursed, and left to its secrets forever. But the nature of a great mystery is that it often draws people in most powerfully at its darkest moments. The intense media coverage of the Restall tragedy brought the story of Oak Island to a new and wider audience. The tale of the treasure miners hunting family, their incredible perseverance, and their heartbreaking end was published in magazines and newspapers across North America. And for a new generation of dreamers and adventurers, the story was not a deterrent. It was a call. Among those who read of the tragedy was a man named Dan Blankenship, a contractor from Florida with a deep and abiding passion for history and a stubborn, unyielding nature. The story of the Restall's sacrifice did not frighten him away, it moved him profoundly. He saw not a curse to be feared, but a challenge to be met, a legacy to be honored. He became convinced that the Restalls had been on the right track, and he resolved that their work and their deaths would not be in vain. And so the shadow of the curse, while bringing one chapter to a close, was already planting the seeds of the next. The island, having claimed its victims, fell silent once more. The abandoned shafts began to fill with rain and leaves. The small cabin stood empty, a lonely monument to a family's broken dream. But the story was now more powerful than ever. It was a tale of immense riches, of ingenious engineering, and now of profound human tragedy. The legacy of the Restall family is not one of failure. They did not find the gold, but they gave the Oak Island mystery its human heart. Their story of love, loyalty, and loss became as integral to the legend as any pirate's map or cryptic stone. And as the island waited, the curse, now 5-7 complete, cast its long shadow forward, waiting for the next person brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to step into it. The profound tragedy of the Restall family cast the longest and darkest shadow yet over Oak Island. The curse, now 5 names long, felt palpable, a malevolent force that had finally bared its teeth. For a time it seemed that the island might finally be left in peace, its secrets deemed too costly to pursue. But a story as powerful as this one, now layered with heroism, sacrifice, and immense loss, does not fade away, it evolves. It finds new champions. The news of the 1965 accident reached a man named Dan Blankenship, a successful building contractor from Miami, Florida. Blankenship was a man of intense focus and unshakable resolve, with a deep love for history and a mind that delighted in solving complex problems. He had been fascinated by the Oak Island mystery since reading the same Reader's Digest article that had captivated Robert Restall. But where Restall had been driven by a spirit of adventure, Blankenship was driven by a kind of fierce analytical obsession. The news of the Restall's deaths did not deter him, it galvanized him. He felt a profound sense of respect for their sacrifice and a powerful conviction that they had been on the verge of a major breakthrough. He believed that to abandon the search now would be to let their efforts and their lives be in vain. He decided that he would be the one to take up the torch. Blankenship was not a lone dreamer. He partnered with another man, David Tobias, a Montreal-based businessman who also shared a deep fascination with the island's legend. Together, they formed a new syndicate, a modern treasure-hunting company they called the Triton Alliance. They pooled their resources, brought in other investors, and in the late 1960s, they began what would become the longest, most sustained, and most technologically advanced assault on the Oak Island mystery to date. Dan Blankenship moved to the island, becoming its new resident guardian, a role he would hold for the next 50 years. He was a different kind of searcher. He was not just a digger, he was a strategist, a relentless investigator who would spend decades meticulously mapping the island, drilling countless boreholes and analyzing every scrap of data he could gather. One of his earliest and most famous projects was a new shaft, drilled in 1971, just north of the original Money Pit area. This shaft, which would become legendary in its own right, was designated Borehole 10-X. It was drilled deep into the bedrock, far below the depths reached by any previous searcher. At a depth of 235 feet, the drill broke through into a large water-filled cavern. This was a monumental discovery. It confirmed that the island was indeed honeycombed with natural or man-made cavities deep within its geological structure. But what happened next would cement 10-X's place in the island's mythology. Blankenship and his team lowered an underwater television camera down the narrow borehole into the cavern. The technology was primitive by today's standards, the images grainy and indistinct, broadcast in black and white on a small monitor on the surface. But what they saw, or what they believed they saw, was electrifying. In the murky, silt-filled water, the camera seemed to capture a series of tantalizing and ghostly images. There appeared to be the rectangular shape of several chests, what looked like a severed human hand floating in the water, and even the shape of a human body lying at the bottom of the cavern. They also saw what looked like tools and other man-made objects. The images were blurry, open to interpretation, and have been the subject of intense debate ever since. Skeptics have argued that they were likely just oddly shaped rocks or tricks of the light and shadow in the murky water. But for Blankenship and the Triton Alliance, it was proof. They believed they had found the final resting place of the treasure, a hidden chamber deep within the bedrock, far below the booby-strapped Money Pit. They sent divers down the narrow, dangerous shaft of 10-X to try and confirm the camera's findings. The visibility in the cavern was almost zero, and the shaft itself was unstable. The divers found nothing conclusive, unable to locate the object seen on the camera in the blinding silt. The cavern, like the Money Pit before it, refused to give up its secrets easily. Eventually, the 10-X shaft itself collapsed, becoming too unstable to explore further, sealing off the mysterious cavern once more. But the story of what the camera saw became a cornerstone of the modern legend. Dan Blankenship's arrival marked a new era. He was a man who would dedicate the rest of his life to the island, his obsession becoming as much a part of the landscape as the oak trees and the sea. He was a bridge between the old world of treasure hunting and the new age of scientific exploration. His work, particularly the tantalizing mystery of Borehole 10-X, would ensure that the quest for the Oak Island treasure would continue, fueled by the ghostly images from a deep, dark cavern and the unwavering resolve of the island's new, steadfast protector. Dan Blankenship's long tenure as the guardian of Oak Island was marked by a quiet, relentless patience. The tantalizing and ultimately frustrating mystery of Borehole 10-X with its ghostly underwater images had only deepened his resolve, perhaps better than anyone before him, that the secret of the island was not confined to a single hole in the ground. It was a landscape-wide puzzle, an intricate piece of engineering that extended from the island's core to its very shores. And so his attention, like that of the Truro Company more than a century earlier, turned back to the place where the island met the sea, Smith's Cove. Blankenship was haunted by the story of the finger drains, that spectacular system of stone-line channels that had been glimpsed for only a fleeting moment before a storm reclaimed them for the ocean. He believed that understanding the flood tunnels was the only way to ever conquer the money pit. In 1970, with the backing of the Triton Alliance, he decided to take up the challenge that had defeated his predecessors. He would once again attempt to hold back the Atlantic. The construction of a new cofferdam at Smith's Cove was a monumental undertaking, far more ambitious than the one built in the 1852. Using modern earth-moving equipment, Blankenship and his team built a massive earthen and steel barrier, a great curving arm designed to withstand the full force of the Nova Scotian tides. It was a slow, arduous, and expensive process, a direct and defiant challenge to the very forces of nature that had guarded the island's secrets for so long. Finally, the dam was complete, the pumps were started, and once again, the water was drawn out from the enclosed section of the cove. As the seabed was exposed, the team began a careful excavation, peeling back the layers of sand and mud, searching for the legendary drains. But they found something else entirely, something unexpected and deeply perplexing. Emerging from the muck was a large, man-made structure built from heavy logs arranged in the distinct shape of a capital letter U. The open end of the U faced the sea, while its base was pointed inland. The logs were notched and fitted together with a skill that spoke of expert craftsmanship. It was clearly not a natural formation, solid and mysterious piece of construction. But the most baffling detail was yet to come. As the workers cleaned the mud from the logs of the U-shaped structure, they discovered a series of markings, carved into the wood at precise foot intervals where what appeared to be Roman numerals. It was another coded message, another piece of deliberate communication from the island's past. What did they signify? Were they survey markers, assembly instructions, or something else entirely, a key to a larger puzzle? The discovery of the U-shaped structure was a major event, but its true significance would only be revealed through modern science. Blankenship, unlike the searchers of the past, had access to new tools for reading history. He had samples of the wood from the structure carefully cut and sent away for dendrochronology, a scientific method of dating wood by analyzing its tree-ring patterns. When the results came back, they were stunning. The wood used to build the U-shaped structure was dated to the year 1716. Let us pause and absorb the weight of that date. 1769. This was 20-6 years before a teen-aged Daniel McGinn is supposedly stumbled upon the first signs of the money pit. This was not a remnant of some later searchers' efforts. This was an original, pre-discovery artifact. It was irrefutable proof that a major, organized, and sophisticated operation was taking place on Oak Island more than a quarter of a century before the official story even began. The discovery fundamentally altered the timeline of the mystery. Who was here in 1716? And what were they building? The U-shaped structure's purpose was a mystery. Was it part of a wharf, a repair slip for ships, or an integral component of the flood tunnel system itself? The revelations at Smith's Cove did not end there. As the excavation continued, another structure was unearthed nearby, a wooden slipway, a ramp of beams extending down into the water, likely used for launching or hauling boats ashore. Wood samples from this slipway were also dated. The results placed its construction around the year 1771, again, more than 2 decades before the money pit was found. Dan Blankenship's work at Smith's Cove did not lead him directly to a treasure chest. Instead, it led him to something arguably more valuable: hard, scientific proof of a secret history. The island was not an empty wilderness in 1795. It was a place of work, of engineering, of some grand and unknown purpose. The money pit was not the beginning of the story, it was merely the chapter that had been discovered first. These findings deepened the mystery profoundly. The question was no longer just about who buried something in the money pit and why. It was now about who was on Oak Island in the 1760s and 1770s and 1770s, what large scale project they were engaged in, and how it all connected to the deeper, booby miners strap shaft. Dan Blankenship, through his patient and analytical approach, had peeled back a new layer of the island's enigma, revealing that the story was older, more complex, and more mysterious than anyone had ever imagined. For decades, the Oak Island story was kept alive by the quiet, stubborn obsession of Dan Blankenship. He was the island's solitary guardian, a man who had dedicated his life to chipping away at its secrets. But as the 20th century drew to a close, the quest was poised for another transformation. One that would bring the mystery out of the quiet woods of Nova Scotia and into the living rooms of millions around the world. This new chapter begins not on the island itself, but in the pages of a well-worn magazine and in the imagination of a young boy. In 1965, the same year as the rest all tragedy, an 11-year-old boy named Rick Laganay, living in Michigan, picked up an issue of Reader's Digest. In it, he found the very same article that had inspired Rabotrest all years before. The story of the money pit, with its ingenious traps, its cryptic clues, and its promise of unimaginable treasure, was more than just an interesting tale. It was a spark. It lit a fire in his imagination that would never go out. He was captivated by the sheer romance and historical depth of the puzzle. Throughout his life, Rick held onto that story. It became a part of him, a private passion. He would share the tale with his younger brother Marty. The two brothers were close but different in temperament. Rick was the dreamer, the romantic, the one who saw the world through a lens of history and legend. Marty was the pragmatist, a sharp and successful engineer who built his life on logic, facts, and tangible results. While Rick was fascinated by the what-if, Marty was grounded in the what-is. And yet, the story of Oak Island became a bond between them, as they grew up and built their own successful lives. Rick as a postal worker, Marty as an energy entrepreneur. The island remained a shared dream, a someday adventure, that someday finally arrived in the early 2000s. Rick, having never lost his childhood fascination, convinced his now very successful brother that they should not just dream about solving the mystery, but actually try. Marty, though skeptical about the existence of any treasure, saw the quest as something more. It was a chance to fulfill his brother's lifelong passion, a grand and complex engineering problem to be solved, and an adventure they could share together. And so, the Laganay brothers decided to invest their own fortune and their own time into taking up the torch. They purchased a controlling interest in Oak Island Tours Inc., the company that held the treasure minus hunting rights, becoming partners with the island's longtime resident searcher, Dan Blankenship. The arrival of Rick and Marty Laganay marked the beginning of the modern era of the Oak Island hunt. They brought with them a new philosophy, one that was profoundly different from the oft unsecretive and competitive spirit of past efforts. Their approach was built on three key principles. First, respect for the island's history. They saw themselves not as conquerors, but as custodians of a 200-year-old legacy. They sought out and honored the work of those who came before them, especially Dan Blankenship, whom they revered as a living legend. Second, collaboration. They assembled a diverse team of experts, a fellowship of the dig, that included geologists, engineers, archaeologists, divers, and metal minus detection specialists. They believed that solving the mystery required a collective effort, a pooling of different skills and perspectives. And third, and most importantly, they brought the full force of 21st-century science and technology to bear on the ancient puzzle. Where past searchers had relied on shovels, drills, and dynamite, the Laganas came armed with an arsenal of advanced tools that used ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys to map the underground structures without disturbing the soil. They employed sophisticated water-analysis techniques to search for traces of precious metals. They utilized advanced computer modeling to try and understand the island's complex geology. They brought in laser-scanning technology to create precise 3D maps of artifacts and features. Their quest was not just to find treasure, it was to find answers. They were as interested in a 300-year-old coin or a piece of ancient pottery as they were in a chest of gold, because every artifact told a piece of the island's hidden story. Tonight, let's picture the arrival of this new generation. They come to the island not with the brash confidence of the steam-Pampera, but with a quiet humility and a deep respect for the immense challenge before them. They stand on the shore of Smith's Cove, or by the edge of the now unrecognizable Money Pit area, not just as treasure hunters, but as historical detectives. The Laganay brothers and their team would launch the most comprehensive, well-funded, and scientifically rigorous investigation in the island's long history. They would examine all the old mysteries, the Money Pit, Smith's Cove, Borehole 10-X, and they would uncover entirely new ones in places no one had ever thought to look. Their journey would bring both incredible discoveries and profound disappointments, but above all, it would prove that the story of Oak Island was far from over. A new age of discovery was about to begin. The arrival of the Laganay brothers and their team marked a new era of exploration on Oak Island, one defined by scientific rigor and a willingness to look beyond the traditional confines of the Money Pit. While the pit remained the ultimate focus, Rick and Marty understood that the island was a complex, interconnected system. They had to understand the whole. This new perspective led them to investigate one of the island's most prominent and yet most overlooked features, the strange triangular swamp. For years, another one of the island's legendary searchers, a surveyor named Fred Nolan, had held a radical theory about the swamp. Nolan, a man who had spent decades meticulously mapping the island, did not believe the swamp was a natural feature. He argued that its perfectly triangular shape was artificial, a man-made basin designed for a specific purpose. Disguised dry dock, created to hide a treasure laid on ship. He believed a Spanish galleon had been sailed into a man-made channel. The channel was then sealed, and the entire area was flooded to create the swamp, concealing the ship and its contents beneath layers of mud and water. It was a bold theory, and for a long time, it was dismissed by many as fanciful. But the Lagan brothers, with their commitment to exploring every possibility, decided to take Nolan's theory seriously. They embarked on one of the most ambitious engineering projects in the island's history. They decided to drain the swamp. The process was immense. They built covered MS to hold back the surrounding water and brought in powerful pumps to draw down the swamp's murky levels. As the water receded, a landscape that had been hidden for centuries began to emerge. As the mud was cleared away, they uncovered a massive, paved stone feature, a wide, flat area of carefully laid stones that stretched across a large portion of the swamp bed. It was clearly not a natural formation. It was a road or a wharf, or a working platform of some kind. When samples from beneath this paved area were carbon stated, the results were mind-boggling. The feature dated back to as early as 1200 AD. This was centuries before Columbus, centuries before any of the popular theories about pirates or Templars. It suggested a human presence on the island far older than anyone had ever imagined. The swamp continued to yield its secrets. As the team carefully excavated the muddy bottom, they began to find a steady stream of incredible artifacts. They found a Spanish copper coin, a maravidi, dated to 1652, providing hard evidence of a Spanish presence on the island long before the money pit's discovery. They unearthed sign spikes of a type used in the construction of 17th-century Spanish galleons, lending powerful support to Fred Nolan's sunken ship theory. But the most remarkable discoveries were yet to come. While digging near the southern edge of the swamp, the team found a piece of a wooden ship's railing. When this wood was carbon-dated, it returned a date range between 660 and 770 AD. At the time, it was the oldest artifact ever found on Oak Island, pushing the timeline of mysterious activity back by another 500 years. Who was sailing these waters in the 7th century? Vikings? Early Irish explorers? The question was profound and unanswerable. The swamp was not just a place of ancient history, it also seemed to be a repository of more recent activity. The team found evidence of a stone pathway leading away from the swamp in the direction of the money pit area. This suggested that whatever was happening in the swamp was directly connected to the activities at the island's core. The work in the swamp was a perfect example of the Lagan brothers' approach. By taking a seemingly wild theory seriously and applying modern engineering and archaeology to it, they had completely rewritten the known history of Oak Island. The swamp was not just a swamp, it was a man-made feature, a site of intense and ancient activity spanning more than 1,000 years. Tonight, let us rest in the quiet, muddy depths of this revealed landscape. Imagine the great stone wharf, its surface slick with water, emerging from the muck after 800 years of silence. Picture the team gathered around a small, corroded copper coin, a tangible link to a Spanish galleon that may have sailed these waters. Feel the sense of awe as a simple piece of wood is revealed to be over 1,300 years old. The secrets of the swamp did not reveal a treasure chest, but they revealed a story of multiple occupations of different cultures and different eras, all drawn to this small, unassuming island for reasons that are still not understood. The swamp proved that the mystery of Oak Island was not just about a single pit, but about the entire island, a place that has been a crossroads of history for far longer than anyone ever knew. The modern era of the Oak Island search, led by the Lagan brothers, was defined by a powerful combination of historical respect and cutting-edge science. They had examined the money pit, drained the swamp, and in doing so, had uncovered artifacts that pushed the island's known timeline back by centuries. But perhaps no single discovery would so perfectly capture the spirit of their quest. The blend of simple, hands-on searching and profound historical implication as a small, unassuming object found in the mud of Smith's Cove. The team had once again focused their efforts on the cove, the site of Dan Blankenship's shape structure and the legendary long-lost finger drains. They were meticulously excavating the beach, hoping to rediscover the entrance to the flood tunnel system. The work was slow and methodical, a process of carefully removing layers of sand and stone that had been churned by tides and storms for over 200 years. On a day like any other, team member Gary Drayton, a metal miners detection specialist with an almost supernatural talent for finding treasure, was sweeping his detector over a pile of excavated spoils. The machine let out a sharp, clear signal, It was a sound he had heard thousands of times, but every signal held the promise of being the one. He knelt down and began to sift through the wet, dark earth with his hands, and then he felt it. Solid object. He pulled it from the mud and wiped it clean. Lying in his palm was a small dark metal cross. It was not a grand, jewel-encrusted crucifix. It was simple, almost crude in its design. It was made of lead, a soft, heavy, and humble metal. The cross had a square hole at the top, suggesting it was meant to be worn on a cord or perhaps affixed to something else. Its shape was unusual, a modified version of a Greek cross, with arms of equal length. The team gathered around, a sense of quiet excitement in the air. Every artifact found on the island is a piece of the puzzle. But this one felt different. It was personal. It was symbolic. It was a direct link to the faith of someone who had stood on this very shore centuries ago. But who? And when? This is where the modern, scientific approach of the Lagane brothers came into play. The cross was carefully documented and sent to a laboratory for analysis. The first tests were conducted using an X-ray fluorescence scanner, a device that can determine the elemental composition of an object without damaging it. The results confirmed the cross was made almost entirely of lead, with a few trace impurities. This was interesting, but the real revelation came from a more advanced technique, laser ablation testing. In this process, a high-powered laser vaporizes a microscopic sample of the metal, allowing scientists to analyze its specific isotopic signature. Every lead deposit on Earth has a unique chemical fingerprint, a ratio of isotopes that can trace it back to its original mine. When the lead from the Oak Island cross was analyzed, the results were astonishing. Its chemical fingerprint was a perfect match for lead from a specific region in southern France. And the story grew even more profound. Based on the type of impurities found in the metal, the scientists were able to date the ore itself. The lead had been mined and smelted sometime before the 15th century. This small, simple cross was not a recent loss from a tourist or a settler. It was a genuine medieval artifact. Let us rest in the weight of this discovery. A lead cross forged in medieval France from pre-15th century ore had somehow made a journey across the Atlantic Ocean, to be lost in the mud of a small cove on a remote island in Nova Scotia, only to be found again more than 500 years later. The implications were immense. This single object provided the first piece of hard, physical evidence to support one of the most epic and romantic theories about Oak Island, the legend of the Knights Templar. The Templars were a French order. They were at the height of their power in the 13th and 14th centuries. After their persecution began in 1307, many were said to have fled, their whereabouts unknown. Could a group of these fugitive knights have made their way to North America, carrying their secrets and their sacred relics? For years it was a theory built on legend and circumstantial evidence, but now he was a tangible link, a simple lead cross of the right material from the right place, and from the right time. The lead cross did not solve the mystery of Oak Island. In fact, it deepened it. It did not lead to a vault of gold, but it opened a new and credible chapter in the island's story. It was a quiet, humble object that spoke volumes. It told a story of faith, of a perilous journey, and of a European presence on this island far earlier than previously proven. Tonight, imagine holding that small, heavy cross in your hand. Feel its weight, the cool, soft texture of the ancient lead. It is a direct connection to a person who lived and breathed more than half a millennium ago. A person whose own story is now forever woven into the fabric of this great mystery. It is a perfect symbol of the Oak Island quest itself. A search that often yields not the treasure one expects, but a story far richer and more complex than ever imagined. In the long and crowded history of the Oak Island search, the landscape has become scarred with the remnants of past efforts. The island is a tapestry of abandoned shafts, collapsed tunnels, and overgrown pits, each one a monument to a failed theory or an exhausted fortune. For decades, one such feature, known simply as the Garden Shaft, was little more than a footnote in this cluttered history. Located near the chaotic, disturbed ground of the Money Pit area, the Garden Shaft was long assumed to be just another searcher's shaft. It was believed to have been dug sometime in the 18th and 19th century by one of the early treasure companies, like the Unsolved or Truro syndicates, in a desperate attempt to bypass the main pit's flood tunnels. As such, it was largely ignored by modern searchers, dismissed as a relic of past failures, a place already explored and abandoned. It was a feature lost in the historical noise of the island. But the approach of the Lagane brothers and their team was different. They were committed to a comprehensive evaluation of the entire island, leaving no stone and no old shaft unturned. They understood that assumptions made in the past could have been wrong, and that clues could have been overlooked. And so, their attention eventually turned to this forgotten hole in the ground. Their initial investigation was methodical and scientific. They did not immediately begin digging, but instead sought to understand the shaft's true age and origin. They carefully extracted samples of the old, waterlogged timbers that formed the shaft's internal structure. These wooden beams, which had held back the Earth for centuries, were sent to a laboratory for carbon-14 dating, a process that could read their age from the faint radioactive signature left within their cells. The team waited for the results, perhaps not expecting anything more than a confirmation of what they already believed, that this was a searcher shaft from the early 1800s. But when the report came back, it contained a revelation that would fundamentally alter the focus of the entire quest. The wood from the garden shaft was not from the 19th century. It was not from the 18th century. The carbon dating placed its origin as early as the year 1735. Let us rest for a moment with the profound weight of that date. 1735. This was 60 years before Daniel McGinn and his friends made their famous discovery in 1795. This was not a searcher shaft. It could not have been. It was an original feature, a part of the island's primary pre-discovery construction. The garden shaft was suddenly resurrected from the dustbin of history and placed at the very center of the original mystery. It was a direct link to the unknown builders, a silent contemporary of the money pit itself. This discovery electrified the team. The garden shaft was no longer an artifact of the search, it was an artifact of the treasure deposit itself. And if it was an original shaft, then it demanded a new and intense level of scrutiny. The next step was to analyze the water that filled the shaft. Using the same advanced geochemical techniques that had been so successful elsewhere on the island, they took samples of the water from deep within the garden shaft. The goal was to see if the water held any trace elements, any chemical signature that might hint at what lay at the bottom. The results of the water analysis provided the second stunning breakthrough. The water in this ancient shaft contained high trace evidence of gold. The connection was now undeniable. This shaft, built in the 1730s, was not only an original part of the island's mystery, but it was also directly associated with precious metals. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would elevate the garden shaft to the absolute epicenter of the modern search, came from a core drilling operation nearby. While drilling in the area, the team encountered a previously unknown, man-made tunnel at a depth of 90-5 feet. This tunnel ran directly beneath the location of the garden shaft. Most incredibly, its path intersected with the very same area that geoscientists drive. Ian Spooner had identified as the baby blob, the small, concentrated zone where water analysis had shown a massive, unnatural deposit of gold was located. All the clues now pointed to one place. The garden shaft was an original, pre-discovery shaft. Its water contained gold, and it sat directly above a mysterious tunnel that ran through the heart of the treasure zone. The team came to a powerful new conclusion. Perhaps the money pit was the decoy, and the garden shaft was the true, original entrance, the intended pathway to the vault below. The focus of the entire Oak Island quest shifted. The new mission was clear. They had to rebuild the garden shaft, shoring up its ancient walls, pumping out its water, and for the first time in nearly 300 years descend to its bottom to see where it, and the mysterious tunnel beneath it, might lead. The rebirth of this forgotten shaft represented the most promising new chapter in the long and often frustrating history of the hunt. For more than 2 centuries, the search for the Oak Island treasure was a profoundly physical act. It was a story told in the language of shovels and spades, of drill bits grinding against wood, and of great machines wrestling with the earth. The clues themselves were tangible things: a stone, a piece of parchment, a link of gold chain. But, in the modern era of the hunt, a new and powerful tool was introduced, one that sought not to move the earth, but to listen to its quiet chemical whispers. The quest was about to enter the invisible world of geochemistry. The Lagin A brothers and their team, committed to using every scientific tool at their disposal, brought in a geoscientist named Dr. Ian Spooner. His specialty was not in digging, but in understanding the subtle language of water. He proposed a revolutionary idea: the water that constantly floods the money pit area, long seen as the greatest obstacle to the search, could, in fact, be its greatest informant. The theory was elegant in its simplicity. Water is a universal solvent. As it flows through the ground, it picks up microscopic traces of every mineral and element it touches. By collecting and analyzing water samples from the various boreholes drilled around the money pit drive, Spooner believed he could create a chemical map of the world below. He was not looking for a treasure chest, he was looking for its chemical shadow. The team began a systematic program of water sampling. They lowered collection vials into the deep, dark water of dozens of boreholes, each one a listening post plunged into the island's mysterious geology. The samples were carefully collected, labeled, and sent to a laboratory for highly sensitive analysis capable of detecting precious metals in concentrations as small as parts per billion. The initial results were intriguing. The water did indeed contain trace amounts of gold and silver, confirming that precious metals were present somewhere in the subterranean environment. But the real breakthrough came when Spooner began to compare the results from all the different boreholes. By mapping the varying concentrations of gold across the entire money pit area, a clear and astonishing pattern began to emerge. The gold was not evenly distributed. Its signature was faint in some areas, stronger in others, and in one specific, concentrated location, the signal was overwhelmingly strong. The data pointed to a single, well-defined zone where the water was consistently showing evidence of a massive, unnatural source of gold. The team gave this target a simple, almost affectionate nickname, the Baby Blob. This baby blob was not a physical object they could see, but a 20- by -20- foot area on their survey map. The data indicated that somewhere within this small square, at a depth between 80 and 120 feet, lay a significant deposit of gold, a deposit so large that it was actively leaching a detectable chemical signature into the surrounding groundwater. This discovery was a paradigm shift for the entire Oak Island quest. For the first time in over 200 years, the location of the treasure was not being guided by a cryptic map, a debatable theory, or a line from a whispered legend. It was being pinpointed by verifiable, repeatable scientific data. Science itself was now drawing a treasure map, and on that map it had placed a large golden X. The excitement this generated was different from the feverish hope of the past. It was a calmer, more confident excitement, rooted in the objective language of parts per billion and isotopic analysis. Not a phantom, but a real physical deposit, slowly dissolving like a sugar cube in a cup of tea, leaving its sweet taste in the surrounding water. And the significance of this discovery was magnified tenfold when it was overlaid with the other recent findings. The team looked at their maps. This scientifically identified gold signature was located directly in the path of the mysterious man-made tunnel they had discovered at a depth of 90-5 feet. Most incredibly, this tunnel and the gold signature were situated directly beneath the newly resurrected garden shaft, the original, pre-discovery shaft dating back to 1735. All the disparate threads of their modern search, the historical analysis, the archaeological finds, the advanced geochemistry, were now converging on a single unified spot. The garden shaft was the entrance, the 95-foot tunnel was the pathway, and the baby blob was the destination. Tonight, let us rest in this moment of profound scientific clarity. For so long shrouded in the fog of legend and speculation, was now being illuminated by the clear, bright light of data. The treasure was no longer just a story to be believed, it was a chemical anomaly to be pursued. Imagine the water, deep in the earth, flowing silently through unseen channels. For centuries, it has been the island's greatest guardian, a relentless force that has thwarted every attempt to reach the secret. But now, that very same water has become a messenger. It has carried the secret to the surface, not in the form of a golden chalice, but as a faint, invisible trace. A chemical whisper that, when finally heard, speaks with undeniable authority. The hunt had found its true north. For more than 200 years, the Oak Island mystery had a single, unwavering heart: the money pit. It was the beginning of the story, the center of every map, and the ultimate destination for every treasure hunter who set foot on the island. From the first dig in 1795, the quest was defined by a simple vertical ambition to dig deeper, to get to the bottom of that one specific hole in the ground. The entire legend was built upon the foundation of this singular, enigmatic shaft. But, as the modern era of exploration unfolded, a profound and challenging question began to surface. A question born from the very history of the search itself. After 2 centuries of relentless digging, after dozens of companies had sunk their own shafts, drilled their own boreholes, and set off their own explosions, where was the original money pit? The area that had once been a small clearing with a single depression in the ground had become a chaotic, scarred landscape. It was a place of overlapping craters, collapsed tunnels, and abandoned equipment, a testament to 2 centuries of human obsession. The precise location of that first 7-foot wide shaft, dug by Daniel McGinn and his friends, had been lost to time, buried beneath the debris of its own legend. The searchers were no longer looking for a needle in a haystack, they were looking for a specific piece of hay in a haystack made of other pieces of hay. This fundamental uncertainty forced the Lagana brothers and their team to step back and reconsider the very nature of their target. And it was Marty Lagana, the engineer, the pragmatist, who began to champion a new and compelling theory, one that questioned the core assumption of the entire treasure hunt. Marty's theory was born of logic. Why, he asked, Would anyone go to the immense trouble of building a complex, booby-strapped vault, only to bury the treasure directly inside it? It seemed counter-intuitive. If the treasure was at the bottom of the main shaft, then any attempt to retrieve it would inevitably trigger the very traps designed to protect it. It was a self-defeating design. Instead, Marty proposed the idea of an off-set chamber. He theorized that the original money pit was never intended to hold the treasure itself. It was, perhaps, a decoy, a massive and elaborate piece of mysterious hidden designed to occupy and exhaust any would-be searchers. Or, perhaps it was an access shaft, a vertical entryway to a separate hidden vault located nearby. In this model, the real treasure would be housed in a secret chamber, connected to the main shaft by a horizontal tunnel. The goal, then, was not to get to the bottom of the money pit, but to find the hidden doorway leading away from it. This theory, born of modern engineering logic, suddenly cast all the old clues in a new light. It explained why 2 centuries of digging directly down had yielded nothing but frustration. It suggested that the searchers had been asking the right question, where is the treasure, but had been looking in the wrong place. They had been trying to break down the front door when they should have been looking for a secret passage in the hallway. And as the team continued their scientific exploration, evidence began to mount that seemed to support Marty's off-set chamber theory. The discovery of the mysterious, man-made tunnel at a depth of 90-5 feet was a crucial piece of the puzzle, which ran east- to west beneath the garden shaft. Did not appear to be part of the flood system. It seemed to be a separate, deliberate construction, a pathway built for a purpose. Then came the scientific revelation of the baby blob. The geochemical data had pinpointed a concentrated source of gold, but this source was not located directly under any of the known major shafts. It was located along the path of that mysterious 95-foot tunnel. The gold wasn't at the bottom of the pit, it was somewhere off to the side, along a hidden corridor. Further evidence came from the drilling of new boreholes. In one area, a drill bit suddenly plunged into a large air-filled void, a hidden cavern that did not appear on any old maps or surveys. The island's underground was proving to be not just a single deep hole, but a complex network of tunnels and chambers, both natural and man-made. The very idea of the money pit was evolving. It was transforming from a single point on a map into a concept, the central hub of a complex, 3-dimensional underground system. The quest was no longer a simple vertical dig. It had become a sophisticated exercise in underground detective work, an attempt to map a hidden architecture of shafts, tunnels, and secret rooms. Tonight, let us rest in this new, more complex vision of the mystery. The puzzle is no longer a straight line down, but a labyrinth. The original builders were not just diggers, they were architects of a subterranean fortress. It also makes more sense. It honors the intelligence and foresight of the unknown depositors. They did not just bury their secret, they encased it in a riddle of space and engineering. The money pit is not the destination, it is the beginning of the final path. And the search now is not just for a place, but for a doorway. As the modern search on Oak Island deepened, it became clear that the island's secrets were not confined to a single pit or a hidden cove. The mystery was woven into the very fabric of the landscape itself. Wild and Blankenship was the island's steadfast guardian. Another man, a quiet and oft and solitary figure, was engaged in his own decades-long quest to read the island's surface. His name was Fred Nolan, and the discovery he made would add another layer of profound and baffling geometry to the puzzle. Fred Nolan was a land surveyor by trade, a man trained to see the world in terms of lines, angles, and precise measurements. He came to Oak Island not as a treasure hunter in the traditional sense, but as a cartographer of secrets. For years he walked the island, through its dense forests and over its rocky terrain, not with a shovel but with a surveyor's transit chain. He believed that the key to the mystery was not buried deep underground but was written on the surface of the island, in a language of landscape and stone. And after years of painstaking work, Nolan made a discovery that was as monumental as it was mysterious. He found that 5 enormous, stone boulders scattered across the island were not randomly placed. When he plotted their positions on his map, they formed a pattern of stunning precision. They formed a gigantic, near-perfect Christian cross. This formation, which came to be known as Nolan's Cross, was staggering in its scale. It measured approximately 360 feet wide and over 800 feet tall. The boulders that marked its points were not small stones, they were massive, deliberate markers, some of which had clearly been shaped or chosen for their specific form. One, known as the cone-shaped boulder, formed the top of the cross. Another, at its center, was a large, flat-stopped stone that seemed to serve as a focal point. The sheer existence of Nolan's Cross was a profound revelation. It was almost impossible to imagine that such a precise, large-scale geometric figure could be the result of natural coincidence. It was a work of human hands, a piece of landscape architecture created on an epic scale. It was another piece of irrefutable evidence that a group with immense resources, a clear plan, and a deep understanding of surveying and geometry had been at work on this island long ago. But what did it mean? This question opened up a whole new realm of speculation, transforming the island from a simple hiding place into a potential sacred site or a giant, cryptic map. Was it all and mark? Perhaps the cross was a massive navigational aid, a symbol so large it could be recognized from a ship at sea, guiding the initiated to this specific island. Its arms seemed to align with key features both on the island and the horizon, suggesting it might be a complex surveying tool. Or was it a religious symbol? The form of the cross is, of course, the most powerful symbol in Christianity. Its presence on the island, laid out in stone on such a grand scale, immediately resonated with one of the most compelling theories about the treasure, the legend of the Knights Templar. Could this have been a secret sanctuary for the fugitive knights, a place where they marked the land itself with the emblem of their faith? The cross was not just a marker, it was a declaration, a sanctification of the ground. Or perhaps, and most tantalizingly, the cross was a map. Nolan himself believed that the geometry of the cross was a key, that the intersection of its lines or the alignment of its points pointed directly to the location of the treasure vault. He spent years trying to decipher its geometric code, convinced that the answer lay not in digging deeper, but in understanding the message written in these 5 great stones. Tonight, let us drift above the island, and in our mind's eye see this great stony pattern emerge from the trees. Picture the 5 boulders, silent and ancient, holding their positions for centuries, forming a secret that was hidden in plain sight. Feel the sense of awe that Fred Nolan must have felt when he first drew the lines on his map and saw the perfect shape reveal itself. Nolan's cross adds a layer of profound and almost mystical significance to the Oak Island puzzle. It suggests that the builders were not just engineers, they were artists, surveyors, and perhaps men of deep faith. They did not just bury a secret, they built a cathedral of earth and stone around it. The cross, like the money pit itself, is a silent narrator. It tells a story of immense effort, of precise planning, and of a purpose so grand that it required marking the very face of the earth. It is a riddle that is both vast and simple, a shape we all recognize, but whose true meaning on this strange island remains just beyond our grasp. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest secrets are not hidden in the dark but are laid out before us, waiting for the right eyes to see the pattern. For many nights, we have explored the grand theories that swirl around Oak Island like the mists of Mahon Bay. We have spoken of pirates and knights, of queens and poets. These stories have been the bedrock of the legend for centuries, powerful narratives that have fueled the search and captured the imagination. But as the modern era of exploration has unearthed a trove of new, scientifically stated artifacts, these old theories are no longer just static legends. They are living ideas being constantly challenged, reshaped, and sometimes powerfully reinforced by the quiet testimony of the objects themselves. Tonight, let us revisit some of these great theories not as we first heard them, but through the lens of the latest discoveries. Let us see how the story changes when the quiet earth finally begins to speak. We begin with the oldest and most romantic theory of all, the treasure of the pirates. For years, the greatest weakness of this theory was the sheer scale of the engineering. It seemed too complex, too patient for the brutish and expedient world of buccaneers. But while the engineering remains a puzzle, recent finds have provided undeniable proof of a 17th and early 18th century maritime presence on the island, the very era of the golden age of piracy. The team unearthed a 17th century Spanish copper coin, a maravidi, a tangible link to the Spanish Main. They found wrought iron spikes of a type used to build Spanish galleons. And on another part of the island, they found 17th century Britannia coins minted in the 1600 seconds, more than 100 years before the money pit was officially found. These are no longer just stories, they are facts. They do not prove that pirates built the money pit, but they prove that the world of pirates was, without a doubt, present on Oak Island. The island was a place of activity during that time, a crossroads for sailors and ships, and perhaps for their valuable cargo. The pirate theory, once seeming too simple, now has a solid historical footing. Next, let us turn to the most epic of the theories, the flight of the Knights Templar. For centuries, this was a story built on legend, on the tantalizing possibility that the fugitive knights carrying sacred relics had made their way to this remote shore. It was a theory that perfectly explained the motive and the engineering skill required, but it lacked a single, solid piece of evidence. That changed dramatically with the discovery of the lead cross. This simple, humble artifact found in the mud of Smith's Cove was scientifically traced to a medieval French mine and dated to the 1300 seconds or 1400 seconds, the very heart of the Templar era. Suddenly, the theory was no longer just a legend, it had a physical anchor, and it did not stop there. A small lead barter token found on a different part of the island was later shown to have the same unique isotopic signature as the cross, suggesting a common origin and a sustained or repeated presence. What was once a fringe romantic notion now has some of the most compelling physical evidence in its favor, transforming it from a whisper into a leading contender for the truth. But, as the new evidence has bolstered the old theories, it has also given rise to a new one, a theory that is less romantic, perhaps, but powerful in its pragmatism and logic. This is the theory of a secret British military operation. The evidence for this is compelling and specific. In the Money Pit area, the team found a gold-plated button from the uniform of an 18th-century British military officer. Near the home of early resident Samuel Ball, they found another button, this one from a British naval officer of the early 1800 seconds. And on another lot, a French military cat badge was discovered, a direct link to the long conflict between Britain and France for control of Nova Scotia. The timeline of these artifacts fits perfectly with the scientifically dated structures found at Smith's Cove. The U-shaped structure and the slipway, dated to the 1760 seconds and 1770 seconds, were built during a period of intense British military activity in the region, particularly around the time of the American Revolution. The motive is clear and logical. Oak Island, with its strategic and defensible location, would have been the perfect place for a secret military treasure or a hidden supply depot for the British forces in North America. This theory requires no leap of faith into ancient conspiracies. It is grounded in the well-documented history of the island, supported by a growing collection of military artifacts. Tonight, we can rest in the gentle complexity of this evolving mystery. The search is no longer about proving one theory right and all others wrong. It is about listening to the chorus of voices that rise from the earth. The voice of a French-led cross, the voice of a British officer's button. Each artifact tells its own story, and each story adds a new layer of richness and depth to the puzzle. The mystery of Oak Island is not a single static truth. It is a living conversation between the past and the present, a story that grows more fascinating with every new discovery. For most of its long and storied history, the Oak Island mystery has been dominated by grand figures and epic theories. We have spoken of pirates and knights, of queens and military commanders, powerful people from distant lands coming to the island to enact some great and secret purpose. But as the modern search has peeled back the layers of the island's soil, it has also begun to reveal a quieter, more local, and equally fascinating story. It is the story of the people who did not just visit the island, but who lived there, who farmed its land, and whose own lives became inextricably woven into its central enigma. Tonight, let us turn our attention away from the great depositors and focus on one of the island's most remarkable residents, a man whose life story is, in its own way, as compelling as any tale of buried treasure. His name was Samuel Ball. Samuel Ball was a black loyalist, a man who had been born into slavery in South Carolina in the mid-1700 seconds. During the American Revolution, he fought for the British, who had promised freedom to any enslaved person who joined their cause. After the war, he, along with thousands of other black loyalists, was evacuated to Nova Scotia to begin a new life as a free man. He settled on Oak Island, acquiring a plot of land, Lot 25, and began the hard work of clearing the forest and farming the rocky soil. For years he was known simply as a cabbage farmer, a man who worked his land with quiet diligence. But Samuel Ball was far more than that. Through hard work, shrewd investments, and an uncanny ability to acquire land, he became one of the wealthiest and most significant landowners in the entire region. At the time of his death, he owned not just his original lot, but several other lots on Oak Island and extensive properties on the mainland. How did a former slave, a man who started with nothing, become so successful? This question has given rise to a powerful and persistent local theory that Samuel Ball, while working his land sometime in the late 18th or early 19th century, found some of the treasure. This theory suggests that the great treasure of Oak Island was not a single, massive hoard, but perhaps a series of smaller, more accessible deposits. Deposits that Ball, while clearing his fields or digging a foundation, stumbled upon one of these caches. He did not find the main vault, he did not trigger the flood tunnels, but he found enough to give him the seed money to begin building his fortune. He was a man of great intelligence and discretion, and he would have used his newfound wealth wisely, investing it slowly over time so as not to arouse suspicion. For a long time, this was just a piece of local folklore, a story told about a successful and respected neighbor. but recent archaeological work on the island has begun to unearth artifacts that lend a new and intriguing credibility to the tale. On Lot 24, adjacent to Ball's property, the team found a small, poignant object, a metal tag, possibly a slave tag, with the name Ball engraved upon it. It is a direct and powerful link to his past, a reminder of the life he escaped. And near the foundation of his former home on Lot 25, another discovery was made: a 19th-century British naval officer's button. Why would a high-ranking naval officer be visiting the home of a simple cabbage farmer? Unless, of course, Samuel Ball was known to be more than just a farmer. Perhaps he was a man of means, a man with whom an officer might have business. The most significant structure associated with Ball is a massive wharf discovered just off the shore of his property. It is a huge construction, far larger than what a simple farmer would ever need. Why would Samuel Ball require such a large wharf? Was he engaged in a secret and lucrative trade? Perhaps using his newfound wealth to become a merchant and shipper? Or was the wharf built for another purpose entirely? The story of Samuel Ball offers a wonderfully grounded and human alternative to the grander theories. It suggests that at least part of the mystery was solved long ago, not by a great treasure company, but by a single hard-working man who had the good fortune to be in the right place at the right time. And the story of the island's other inhabitants does not end with the settlers. There is growing evidence that long before any European set foot on its shores, Oak Island was a place of significance for the indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the MIKMAQ. The discovery of ancient artifacts, like the paved area in the swamp dating to 1200 AD, suggests a human presence that predates any of the European theories. Was it possible that the MIKMAQ knew of the island's secrets, that they were the original guardians of its stories? Perhaps the legends of curses and spirits that have long surrounded the island are echoes of ancient indigenous warnings, stories meant to protect a sacred place. Tonight, let us rest with the stories of these other inhabitants. Let us think of Samuel Ball, the man who rose from slavery to become a man of wealth and influence, perhaps with a secret that he carried with him to his grave. And let us think of the even older presence of the MIKMAQ, whose own history on this island is a mystery we are only just beginning to uncover. Their stories remind us that the island is not just a vault for a single treasure, but a place of many layers, many histories, and many secrets, some of which may have been found, and others that are still waiting patiently to be heard. In the long and winding story of Oak Island, there is a dark thread that runs parallel to the tales of treasure and discovery. It is a story of cost, of sacrifice, and of a persistent, chilling legend that has grown more potent with each passing generation. It is the story of the Oak Island curse. Tonight, let us quiet our minds and turn our attention to this somber legacy. It is a story that reminds us that the pursuit of great mysteries can sometimes demand the greatest price. The legend is simple and stark: 7 men must die before the island will give up its treasure. For the first 60-6 years of the search, from 1795 until the mid-19th century, this was likely just a piece of local folklore, a ghost story told to add a shiver of excitement to the tale of the money pit. The quest was frustrating, expensive, and baffling, but it had not yet been fatal. That all changed in 1861. The Oak Island Association had brought the full force of the Industrial Revolution to the island in the form of a powerful steam-driven pump. It was a symbol of modern confidence, a machine built to conquer the ancient water trap. The boiler of that great engine exploded. In that sudden, violent failure of technology, an unnamed worker was killed, becoming the first recorded fatality in the long history of the search. In that moment, the curse transformed. It was no longer just a spooky tale whispered around a fire. It now had a name, even if that name is lost to history. It had a date. It had a reality. The ledger had been opened, and the first entry had been made. 1 of 7. For nearly a century after that first tragedy, the island held its peace. The search continued in fits and starts, with new companies and new dreamers coming and going, but the grim tally of the curse remained at 1. The legend softened again, becoming more of a historical footnote than an active threat. And then came the Restall family. Their story, as we have heard, was one of profound hope and devastating loss. On that terrible August afternoon in 1965, the curse returned with a vengeance that stunned everyone. It was not a slow, creeping danger, but a silent, swift, and merciless event. When Robert Restall was overcome by poisonous gas at the bottom of a shallow shaft, a chain of heroic, tragic instinct was set in motion. His son, Bobby, went in to save him. Their work partner, Carl Grazer, followed, and then another helper, Cyril Hiltz, descended into the deadly air. In the space of a few minutes, 4 men were lost. The weight of that day was immense. The curse, which had been dormant for 100 years, had now claimed for more lives in a single blow. The tally leapt from 1 to 5. The prophecy suddenly felt terrifyingly real and horribly close to its conclusion. The sixth death came years later, under different circumstances, but was no less tragic. A man named Maynard Kaiser, a member of a later treasure miners hunting expedition, fell into a shaft in 1981 with his passing. The number on the grim ledger rose to 6. 6 men over the course of more than a century had lost their lives in the pursuit of the island's secret. And so the question hangs in the air, a constant, unspoken presence for every person who now sets foot on the island with a shovel or a drill. Who will be the seventh? This is the heavy inheritance of the modern search team. For Rick and Marty Laguenay, the curse is not a legend to be taken lightly. It is a constant and sobering reminder of the very real dangers of their work. They are digging in a landscape that is not just historically complex but physically treacherous, a place of deep, unstable shafts, of unseen voids, and of the ever-present risk of collapse or accident. The curse can be seen in two ways. For some, it is a literal, supernatural warning of effectively protecting the treasure. For others, it is a more metaphorical truth, a grim acknowledgement that this kind of dangerous, pioneering work, especially in centuries past with more primitive technology, inevitably carries a high risk, but because of the inherent perils of the quest itself. But regardless of how one interprets it, the weight of the curse has changed the very nature of the hunt. It is no longer just about finding gold or rewriting history. For Rick Laguenay in particular, it has become a solemn duty to honor the memory of the 6 who came before. The search is now infused with a sense of caution, of respect, and of a profound responsibility to ensure that the number does not grow. Tonight, blessed with this thought, the true weight of Oak Island is not the weight of any treasure, but the weight of its human cost. The 6 men who died were not just numbers in a prophecy, they were husbands, sons, and fathers. They were dreamers, adventurers, and workers, each with their own hopes. Their loss is the deepest and most real part of the island's story. It transforms the quest from a simple adventure into something more sacred, a mission to find not just a treasure, but a resolution, an answer that might finally bring a sense of peace to this beautiful, haunted, and sorrowful island. The story of Oak Island in the 21st century is a story of incredible technological power. The arrival of the Laguenay brothers and their team heralded a new age of discovery, one in which the brute force of the past was augmented by the keen, analytical eye of modern science. The island's secrets were being probed not just with drills and shovels, but with tools that could see through the earth, read the memory of wood, and taste the chemical signature of water. Let us take a moment to appreciate the sheer power of this new arsenal. Ground-minus penetrating radar sends silent waves of energy into the soil, creating maps of buried walls and hidden voids without disturbing a single stone. Seismic surveys listen to the echoes of sound, painting a picture of the island's deep geology. Laser scanners capture millions of points of data, preserving artifacts and structures in perfect, 3-dimensional detail. And perhaps most powerfully, advanced carbon dating and geochemical analysis have allowed the team to ask direct questions of the past. How old is this wood? Where did this metal come from? Is there gold in this water? This technological revolution has been undeniably successful. It has peeled back layers of myth and replaced them with hard, scientific fact. It has confirmed a human presence on the island far older than ever imagined, with artifacts dating back to the Roman era, the Middle Ages, and the Golden Age of piracy. It has proven that the swamp is a man-made feature and that the ground beneath the money pit area is rich with the chemical signature of gold and silver. Science has acted as a time machine, allowing the searchers to speak with the past in a language of isotopes and elemental analysis. At times, as though the final solution to the mystery is just one more sample, one more water test, one more scientific breakthrough away. And yet, for all its power, for all its incredible revelations, modern technology has also served a more humbling purpose. It has revealed with greater clarity than ever before the true, enduring scale of the island's defenses. It has shown the searchers the very limits of their own power. Despite the most advanced pumps and the most sophisticated engineering, the two great antagonists of the Oak Island story remain undefeated: the water and the geology. The water, that relentless tidal influx from the Atlantic, continues its patient vigil. The flood tunnels, whether man-made or a natural feature of the island's porous geology, still feed the pits faster than they can be drained. Technology can hold the water at bay for a time, creating small windows for work, but it has not yet been able to silence it. The ocean remains the island's ultimate guardian, a force that cannot be reasoned with or overcome by machinery alone. And then, there is the earth itself. The island's geology is a treasure hunter's nightmare. The ground is a chaotic mixture of glacial till a loose jumble of clay, sand, and stone, and a deep bedrock of soft, soluble limestone and gypsum. This geology is inherently unstable, prone to the formation of natural sinkholes and voids. 2 centuries of treasure hunting have only made it more treacherous. The landscape is now a honeycomb of old, collapsing searcher shafts and tunnels, a Swiss cheese of abandoned efforts that makes every new excavation a perilous undertaking. Modern caissons and shoring techniques can provide protection, but they are constantly battling the island's tendency to simply swallow the works of man. Beyond the physical limits, technology has also highlighted the enduring human challenges of the quest. The search, even with all its advanced tools, remains an incredibly slow and astronomically expensive endeavor. Each seismic survey, each metallurgical report, each day of running the heavy machinery represents a significant investment of time and money. The modern search, like every search before it, is still a race against a dwindling budget and the coming of winter. And finally, technology has revealed its own most profound limitation. It can provide data, but it cannot always provide answers. It can identify a metal object, but it cannot tell us how it got there. It can date a piece of wood, but it cannot tell us the story of the hands that shaped it. It can detect the presence of gold in the water, but it cannot show us the form of the treasure itself. Every new piece of data still requires human interpretation, and interpretation is always colored by hope, by theory, and by the deep human desire to find meaning in the clues. The mystery remains at its heart, a human one. Tonight, let us rest in this quiet, humbling space between what we know and what we do not. Technology has been a powerful lantern, illuminating many of the dark corners of the Oak Island mystery. But its greatest revelation may be the true size and shape of the darkness that remains. It has shown us that the island's secret is protected not just by clever traps, but by the fundamental forces of nature and the very passage of time. The quest continues, no longer with the brash confidence of the industrial age, but with a newfound respect for an ancient puzzle that still, after all this time, refuses to be easily solved. For more than 2 centuries, the story of Oak Island has been a story of human endeavor. We have imagined the hands of pirates, knights and kings shaping its earth, digging its shafts, and setting its ingenious traps. The entire legend is built on the assumption of a great and secret purpose, a human intelligence behind the design. But tonight, let us explore a final, profound, and quietly unsettling theory. It is a theory that has no heroes and no villains, no treasure and no depositors. It is a theory that suggests the entire, sprawling, 200-year-old mystery might be nothing more than a grand and beautiful misunderstanding. It is the theory that the Oak Island money pit is not the work of man at all but a trick of nature. This idea comes not from treasure hunters or historians but from geologists, scientists who read the story of the Earth not in cryptic maps but in the layers of rock and soil. To understand this theory, we must look beneath the surface of the island, deeper than any shaft, to the very bones of the land itself. The bedrock of Eastern Oak Island is composed primarily of soft, soluble minerals like gypsum and limestone. These are rocks that water can, over immense spans of time, dissolve and carry away. Over thousands of years, how groundwater, seeping down from the surface, has slowly eaten away at the soft stone, creating a network of hidden channels, caves, and vast, empty caverns deep within the island's foundation. This type of landscape, honeycombed with underground voids, is known as karst topography, and it is a natural process that occurs all over the world. Now, imagine the ground above one of these great, hidden caverns, the heavy glacial till. The mix of clay, sand, and gravel left behind by the last ice age is no longer supported by solid rock. Over time, under its own immense weight, it begins to slump, to settle, and then, perhaps suddenly, to collapse downward, filling the void below. The result, on the surface, is a deep circular depression, a natural sinkhole. This is the heart of the geological theory that the money pit, the very origin of the legend, was never a man-made shaft. It was a natural sinkhole formed by the slow, patient work of water on stone. This theory, in its elegant simplicity, offers a rational explanation for many of the puzzles that have baffled searchers for centuries. Consider the oak platforms, found at 10-foot intervals. In a forest environment, a sinkhole would not just swallow earth, it would swallow trees. As the ground collapsed over centuries, entire trees could have fallen into the pit, becoming lodged horizontally, creating layers of wood that, to a hopeful treasure hunter, would look exactly like man-made platforms. And what of the famous flood tunnels, the ingenious booby trap that has defeated every major expedition? The geologist sees no need for secret engineering. The natural network of channels and fissures within the soluble limestone would act as a perfect conduit for seawater. As soon as a digging crew pierced deep enough to connect their shaft with this existing natural plumbing, the ocean would simply do what it has always done, flow in to fill the empty space. The trap was not built, it was simply there, a natural feature of the island's geology. Even some of the more exotic clues can be explained. The coconut fiber, for instance. Ocean currents are powerful forces capable of carrying debris for thousands of miles. It is entirely plausible that coconut husks, used as packing material on ships in the Caribbean, were washed overboard, drifted north on the Gulf Stream, and were eventually washed ashore on Oak Island, where they were drawn into the sinkhole along with other natural debris. The evidence for this theory is not just hypothetical. In 1878, on Oak Island itself, just a few hundred yards from the money pit, a farmer named Sophia Sellers was plowing her field when the ground suddenly gave way beneath her oxen, plunging them into a 12-foot deep hole. A real -time demonstration of the very process that may have created the money pit. And yet, as compelling and as logical as this theory is, it does not quiet all of the island's whispers. It leaves certain crucial questions unanswered. How does a natural sinkhole account for the sheer volume of man-made artifacts found on the island? How does it explain the lead cross from medieval France, the Spanish coins, the Roman-era artifacts, the fragments of parchment, or the human bones of both European and Middle Eastern descent found deep within the money pit area? Nature can create a whole, but it cannot forge a coin or bind a book. How does a random geological process create the stunning, surveyor-perfect geometry of Nolan's Cross, or the carefully constructed, parallel finger drains at Smith's Cove? These features speak of a human intelligence, of a deliberate design that seems to defy the chaos of natural formation. And what of the inscribed stone? While its story is shrouded in mystery, the persistent legend of a stone bearing a coded message is difficult to reconcile with a purely natural phenomenon. Tonight, let us rest in this place of beautiful uncertainty. The geological theory offers a powerful, rational, and elegant explanation for many of the island's most baffling features. It reminds us that we should be cautious, that we should not always assume a human hand where nature itself can perform such wonders. But it does not explain everything. The final truth of Oak Island may not be a simple choice between man-made or natural. Perhaps the truth is a hybrid of the two. Perhaps it began as a natural sinkhole, a deep and unusual feature that was then discovered by people long ago who recognized its potential and adapted it for their own secret purpose, enhancing its natural defenses with their own engineering. The island holds its secret swell, protected by both the ingenuity of man and the immense patient power of the earth itself. The mystery endures, a perfect blend of what can be explained and what, as of yet, cannot. I have completed the writing for the 40th and final episode. After a self-check, the word count is within the requested range. For 40 nights, we have journeyed together to a small windswept island in the North Atlantic. We have traveled through time from the first curious glance of a young man in 1795 to the high-tech scientific investigations of the present day. We have stood beside the dreamers and the engineers, the daredevils and the detectives. We have felt the thrill of discovery, the sting of failure, and the profound weight of loss. We have followed the story down through layers of oak and charcoal, through water and mud, through centuries of hope. And now, at the end of our journey, we are left with the final essential question. What is the real treasure of Oak Island? Perhaps the answer is that there have always been two treasures. The first is the one that has fueled the legend, the one that has launched 1,000 ships and countless fortunes. It is the treasure that lies, or is said to lie, deep within the earth. It is the pirate's gold, the Templar relics, the Queen's jewels, the lost manuscripts. It is a treasure of immense material or historical value, a tangible prize waiting at the end of a long and perilous quest. And after all the effort, the truth is that we still do not know if this first treasure even exists. It remains a tantalizing possibility, a shimmering dream that is always just out of reach. It is the great, unanswered question of the island. But then there is the second treasure, and this treasure is not a dream. It is real. It has already been found. We have been uncovering it, piece by piece, every night that we have spent with this story. This second treasure is not made of gold or silver. It is made of the quest itself. Its first component is the rich and complex tapestry of human history that the island has been forced to reveal. Before the modern search began, we thought the story of Oak Island started in 1795. But the search has proven that to be just one chapter in a much older book. The quest for a single treasure has unearthed the story of many peoples. It has given us a 17th-century Spanish coin whispering of galleons in the New World. It has given us a humble lead cross, a tangible link to medieval France and the epic saga of the Knights Templar. It has given us military buttons from British and French soldiers grounding the mystery in the great conflicts that shaped continent. It has even given us a Roman coin, a find so ancient it defies easy explanation. The search has transformed our understanding of this small piece of land, revealing it to be not an empty wilderness, but a crossroads of the world for more than 1,000 years. This knowledge, this rewritten history, is a treasure of immense value. The second part of this treasure is the story of human ingenuity and perseverance. It is a testament to our relentless, unshakable desire to solve a puzzle. We see it in the breathtaking skill of the original builders. Whoever they were, master engineers who could design a self-circulating water trap and structures that would endure for centuries. And we see it in every generation of searchers who followed. We see it in the simple, brute force determination of the Onslow Company, in the clever, tactile probing of the Truro Company's auger, in the industrial might of the Oak Island Association's steam pump. We see it in the quiet, lifelong dedication of men like Dan Blankenship and Fred Nolan, who gave their entire lives to mapping and understanding the island's secrets. And we see it today in the Lagune brothers, who have brought the full power of science to bear on the ancient mystery. This story of human minds wrestling with a great challenge across the centuries is itself a treasure. And finally, the most precious part of this second treasure is the human story. It is the story of hope, of the bond between the three young friends who first started digging, their hearts full of adventure. It is the story of family, of the Ray Stolls who turned their backs on a comfortable life to pursue a shared dream in a tiny cabin. A story of love and adventure that ended in unimaginable heartbreak. It is the story of brotherhood of Rick and Marty Lagune, one a dreamer and one a pragmatist, who came together to fulfill a childhood promise. The treasure is found in the quiet moments of discovery, the shared disappointment of failure, and the solemn duty to honor the memory of the 6 men who lost their lives in this pursuit. These stories of courage, obsession, love, and loss are more valuable than any chest of gold. And so as our journey comes to a close, we can rest in the knowledge that a great treasure has indeed been found on Oak Island. It is the story itself. The digging on the island continues. The mystery is not yet solved. The first treasure, the one of gold and jewels, may still be waiting in the darkness, or it may not, but in a way, the final answer almost doesn't matter. The beauty of the Oak Island mystery, the thing that has held our attention for so long, is that it is a story without an ending. It is a quest that is always about the journey, not the destination. The open mind ascended nature of the puzzle is what keeps the dream alive, what allows each of us to wonder, to speculate, and to imagine. Tonight, you can let the story rest. Let the island keep its final secret for a little while longer. The greatest treasures are often not the answers we find, but the beautiful, enduring questions that guide us into a world of wonder and allow us to drift peacefully into a deep and restful sleep. Wherever you are, whenever it is, I hope sleep finds you gently tonight.